So hi, everyone. I am going to call the advisory committee meeting to order at 6:32 p.m. on January 20th, 2021. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Southborough Advisory Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. All right, so welcome everybody. So Mary Lou, is that it for Board of Health, you and Heather?
I believe it is.
All right. Okay, so we're going to do the easy part first. So let's get that out of the way, and then I'll ask you to introduce Heather, and then we'll start talking about your proposed budget for fiscal year 22.
Sure, great.
Right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. I would like to introduce you to our new interim public health director, Dr. Heather Alker. Heather, I didn't know if you wanted to say a few words before we get started.
Okay, so for introduction, I'm delighted to be here. I'm a practicing physician, originally practiced OBGYN, and then 10 years ago, I moved into do a second training in called Preventive Medicine and Public Health at UMass Worcester. I love the program. I stayed on as faculty, and so I've been teaching there. I do research on infant mortality in central Massachusetts, GIS programming and looking at that. And I also serve at Mass Medical Society on Committee on Public Health and Committee Environmental Occupational Health. And that's also where I'm getting some interest in public health, and it's how I heard about this position in Southborough. So I'm excited to be here and really, like I said, emerging sort of background in public health, and have seen in the past 10 years how much more is involved, and how much more data we have about where you live and that impact, and where you work and that impact on your health, as well as programs that are available to work on many different issues.
Thanks, Heather. Heather's just getting her feet wet, trying to meet everybody in town. Yeah, and so it's been great, and I'm grateful that she could be here. I thought it'd be great for all of you to meet her, and she is interested in staying on at this point, and applying for the full-time position going forward. So as she gets to know Southborough, I think she'll be excited to stay on, and we'll be excited to have her. So I know you wanted to do the easy part first, and that's similar to what we talked about at the last advisory meeting. And that is that Emily Amico, who was brought on last February at 19 and a half hours, has just burnt herself out, working 40 or more hours with 3 school-age kids, trying to remote learning, and she just can't do that. We don't want to do that to another nurse coming on, and so we would like to contract for a full-time public health nurse, and also I don't want to do that to Heather either, because as she's just getting started, and Heather,
right.
Emily's leaving on.
We need someone, right? We need a nurse. Yeah.
Emily's leaving on February 10th, and so we just worked on the posting, and hopefully a vote of reserve fund potential, because we feel pretty strongly that almost this entire position could get reimbursed through the CARES Act fund, or at least the half. So similar to how you thought about it with the interim public health director, is that if we don't get reimbursement, then the reserve fund transfer would happen at the end of the fiscal year. That's what we were thinking. And I did do, it sort of, for purposes of this discussion, but also purpose of the bigger discussion of our 22 budget, I did look at many of the comps in surrounding towns. I did send that to you, Kathy, but I mean, I think I can just sort of speak to it. I looked at towns that are similar population, similar septic, because some towns have all septic, some don't have half septic, some have not. So I looked at ones that were comparative, and Southborough has had a half-time public health director, half-time public health nurse, and half-time administrative staff. Weston, which is pretty close, it's only maybe 1,500 more in population, similar full septic, 100% septic like we are. They have a full-time health director, a full-time inspector, a full-time public health nurse, and a full-time administrative assistant. Wayland has a full-time director, a full-time inspector, a full-time public health nurse, and a 1.5-time administrative assistant. Hopkinton has a full-time director, and they contract with the Visiting Nurse Association for their nursing services. What I wasn't able to capture is how much money that is, because when we had looked into that before, it's more costly for the town to contract out the services, and you don't have a dedicated nurse that sort of gets to know the town and what the town needs. Sharon is a little bit higher. They're at 13,000 population, but they have a full-time health director, a full-time inspector, a full-time public health nurse, and a half-time administrative. Sudbury has a full-time health director, contracted health inspector, 1.5 public health nurse, and a full-time administrative assistant. So I thought those were kind of good comparisons that we're looking at, really being in line with what needs to get done from a public health and a public safety perspective for Southborough.
Okay, so is everybody on board with what the request is tonight? It's similar to what we did last week. We basically changed the amount. So we basically are being the backup funding source for the additional cost for fiscal year 21 of converting the part-time nurse position to a full-time nurse position. And the estimate is that it's about $29,000. So if we approve that tonight, we basically have 3 kind of standby requests that we have said we will approve if need be at the end of fiscal year. So this is number 3. So we've got the chief's antenna, which is 8,000 and change. We've got the request from last week for the additional cost of Heather, which is 34,500. And now we've got this. So those 3 added up are what, 34, 64, 72,000 out of 180. Okay, questions before we vote? I've got the motion written like I did last week, but let's talk about it. So,
I have a few. So I have the job posting open that's on the town website. You said, Mary Lou, was going to be a contract, right?
It will be a contracted full-time position with benefits.
With a term ending when?
As long as we can put it out. I mean, most of the town contracts are all 3-year contracts. So that would be our ideal.
So I'm not, and if that's where we're going, I'm not in favor of this, Kathy, until we can do a more robust, and this may tie into the budget discussion. And I'm not saying I'm not in favor of this position, but to use a reserve fund transfer to then lock ourselves into a 3-year contract
Oh, I see. Okay. So,
So Mary,
how
just
could you do
clear,
that?
we're not going to be voting tonight on your fiscal year 22 budget. The
Right,
overall town budget needs a whole lot of work at this point. So we've
right.
got a lot of work to do between now and town meeting to come up with a reasonable year-over-year increase in taxes. So we don't know where we're going to end up as far as the recommendation to town meeting of your budget. So therefore, we don't want to take any vote that's going to lock us in to basically approving one of the three positions you want full-time, because we're not ready for that. So we're willing to do what we did last week for Heather, but only, to basically fund someone who has got a short-term deal, and not a 3-year contract. So I didn't realize until you just said that you are advertising for a person with a 3-year contract.
Well, the 3-year contract, I mean, so I guess the question for you is if it was a 1-year contract, it's still going to go past. And if Heather agreed to come on as the interim director for a lot of different reasons without benefits. The reality of finding a nurse to come over with no benefits. There's so many public health nurses that are positions that are posted right now. They're looking for them everywhere. So to bring on someone for 4 to 5 months with no benefits, I mean, I don't know if that's even going to be possible.
So CARES Act is through the end of 2021 now, right? And
Correct.
what due diligence have you done to get the comfort level that you said that you think this is covered?
I have, and actually Andrew has, and Kathy has, and Carla has, and Carla got clarification from the state office saying that staff is covered,
Including benefits.
including benefits.
All right. So Kathy, I guess to close that out is I would only be in favor of this if the contract is through 12/31 of 2021. It could be extended, but
Right.
that is only going to be subject to obviously not only us supporting the position longer term, Board of Selectmen, but also town meeting, more importantly, right?
Right.
So, and obviously Board of Health brings their own budget to town meeting, but I'm not in favor of anything that goes beyond the current date of when CARES Act ends.
I think that's fair. Heather, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, that's almost a year, so I think we could find somebody for that, knowing that it's a possibility, and they're going to know way before December. If
renewal.
we have the funding.
My question on the finances is if Emily was hired part-time but has been working full-time, financially, I mean, does she have benefits?
No.
No.
Because she came on at 19 and a half hours and she's been working 40. So her extra hours has come out of CARES Act funding, but she's not. And that's part of the reason for going to a contracted benefited position, is so that we can get somebody that has some public health background.
Right. And definitely, like you said, there's a lot of postings for public health nurses. So,
So Heather, do you believe that we could find someone that would be qualified to take a full-time position from whenever we can get them hired to the end of calendar year 2021, knowing that the half-time position will still be there for the second part of fiscal year 22, which would be 1/1/22 through 6/30/22, but there's no guarantee right now that the full-time piece of it, the second half, would be there.
I see, because you're saying after the CARES funding, you would potentially move the position to half-time.
Well, you've got half-time right now, so no one's talking about taking the half-time.
Right. But half-time with benefits?
No. Anytime you're
No. Oh, back to the half-time.
And it's half-time with benefits, and it's salary administration plan that isn't even close to comparable to hire somebody at the $34 an hour. With we're never going to find anyone.
Well, we're not saying find someone for that. What we're saying is what would be acceptable, I think, to advisory tonight, but no, we haven't all spoken yet, is that we'd be willing to approve the additional, be the backup funding source of the additional cost for fiscal year 21, as long as we know we haven't locked ourselves in through the full-time position beyond 12/31/21. And it doesn't mean it's not going to turn out. Mary Lou says we're not ready tonight to lock ourselves into that.
No, I think that's perfectly fair. And I'm hopeful we could find someone in that contracted position, and obviously it'll be based on funding to continue it, but I feel much better about being able to find somebody for that than to someone for 4 months.
All right, good. So we at least help
Yeah,
there.
the 10 months, right,
this is
basically
the
10
case.
months. Yeah.
This will get decided in the next couple months. Town meeting is being postponed until May or June. That's a fact at this point. But it's going to happen. This is almost February, so we will know soon what the budget recommendations will look like. You'll know soon what you're going to do at town meeting if you disagree with what the advisory and or BOS recommendation is going to be to the town. I mean, you've got the right to stand up and say, nope, this is the budget that this board has approved, and it's for something different than what your finance committee and your BOS have done. So you certainly have the right to do it. And so it will get worked out soon. It's just, we can't get it worked out tonight.
Right, agreed.
Kathy, can I ask a question? How would our approach to COVID be different if we had a full-time benefited nurse?
The response probably wouldn't be a lot different, except we wouldn't have the burnout that.
Right, Emily might not be leaving.
Emily might not be leaving if she was in a full-time
Hired
benefited
at
position.
full-time.
Yeah, she's in a half-time unbenefited position and working way more hours than she was hired to do nor planned to do.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, that in the end, we would benefit as a town, having a
But
full-time.
We're going to vote. So we're voting to basically make sure they've got the funding to go ahead right now and make that position officially full-time temporarily. So that's what we're doing. We hope we're going to be beyond COVID at some point. So then the question is, what do we think the Board of Health structure should look like long-term? That's what we're going to get to next after we get this one dealt with, as far as the reserve fund potential transfer. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So Jason, do you have any more questions on the potential reserve fund vote?
No, no questions. I think my comment is pretty clear of what I'd be looking for in a motion, Kathy, because I know you said you had something prepared. So something along the lines of 12/31, and obviously I'm very open to listening about the future, but I'm not ready tonight to go beyond 12/31.
Andrew P.
Am I the only one who
Are
can't
you
hear
on
Andrew?
mute? Andrew, are you on mute?
Doesn't look like it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I was going to say I would probably amend what Jason had to 6:30. The issue is going to be is if it's 12/31 and we include it in the budget, we can't get CARES Act.
But we're not saying we're going to do that.
Okay.
Andrew. So we still say, we're still assuming the budget is the part-time person, and CARES Act will pay for the rest of it because it's not budgeted. So we're not proposing putting it in the budget full-time for the first 6 months.
Okay.
Is that it for you?
I think, and is there a different rate, or is it just basically what we have now for the part-time but additional hours? And I think we need to clarify whether or not this is going to be a benefited position, because I think that changes. If it's just, 40 hours for a contractor, a consultant, right, at whatever it is per hour with no benefits, that's a different story.
They're talking about a benefited position. This is an employee, so you don't get fooled by the word contract. She's going to sign in a contract as an employee. So it is benefited, and they are going to apply for the cost of benefits with the CARES Act, in addition to the additional cost of the salary. So it is benefited.
And then I'm not in favor of that. I would be more in favor of a true consultant without benefits, even at a much higher rate, even at whatever it is, $80, $85 an hour. But that's my opinion.
Okay, I'm not sure it's our place to necessarily make that kind of call. Our call is, do we want to use reserve fund to do this? We can certainly put parameters in, which we're going to, including what Jason just wanted me to add. But I'm not sure it's our call, or it should be our call, as far as whether the person is an employee versus a independent contractor. But you can discuss. Okay, so that's it for you for the moment, Andrew. We'll come back to that one. Tim?
I'll wait until I hear the motion.
Andrew D?
Yes, the $29,000 figure, Kathy, that you're referring to, does that include the benefits that we're talking about?
I don't think so. Right, Mary?
No.
Beth? This is just, the town, the way we do our budget is we put just the gross salary in the department budgets, and then the benefits go in a separate line item for both schools and for towns. So no, so departments tend to, when they talk about additional costs, just look at salary and don't try to pick up the benefit piece.
And could you, so by having an employment contract where it's going to be, the contract would be through December 31, 2021. The person would be an employee, and then they would be receiving their health insurance through the town, right? It wouldn't be like, okay. Just putting something out there. I know a lot of thought has got into this, but does it make sense to just kind of, in the interest of transparency about the full cost, if we're going to approve a reserve fund transfer for the 29, to make an estimate of what actually the cost of the benefits would be, having in mind, right? It seems like this is something where you think there's going to be reimbursement from CARES, so that the effect on the budget at the end would be none. But I mean, there's got to be some rough, rule of thumb, right, about what fringe benefits cost to it, and then that would be a reserve fund transfer that would, I guess, be picked up from by the benefits item, the benefits line item. Just throwing it out there for discussion purposes.
No, it's a good point. And I didn't put it in there for two reasons. Number one, it is hard to estimate because you don't know whether she's single, he or she is single, family, whatever. So the cost could vary quite a bit depending on what type of coverage he or she selects. But more importantly, the benefits budget for the year I'm not going to call it fat in it, but it's got a lot of estimates as far as people. People come and go during the year, right? So it's hard to truly pin that budget down at the beginning of the year. So I'm just assuming that there's going to be enough money in it at the end of the year to not have to worry about a reserve fund transfer for that. They had quite a bit of money left over last year. In fact, you remember, that's where a lot of the interdepartment transfers came out of, is from the benefits budget. So it may be, the worst case is, you're right, the reserve fund transfer that we have to approve could include some benefits cost if everything I said is wrong. But a lot would have to go wrong. Number one, CARES Act we have to be wrong about CARES Act, and I get that. And I don't think we're wrong about that. It's pretty clear that we qualify. So that would have to not happen. Number two, the benefits budget itself would have to need some help with reserve fund. And well, I guess it's two. So those two things would have to happen before we would have to do reserve fund transfer for benefits for this person. So the 29 could be low, you're right. So we could set aside more money. I've got a spreadsheet. If you look at OneDrive, there's a spreadsheet in it that's keeping track of where we are with the reserve fund. So we could certainly put more in as reserve just in case.
Could you put, I'd say 30% on top?
I was going to say 25, Tim, so I'm with you. So 25 to 30 is pretty reasonable as far as, the full package of benefits that employees typically get. So that would be a reasonable thing to do.
I think it's about 25K, right, Kathy? Not
Well,
20.
it depends. It depends, Andrew. What if it's a single person? Or what if it's a person who's married to someone and that person's going to stay on their insurance? So there's just a lot of things that are going to determine what that cost is. So it could be 25. It could be less. So I'm going to come back to you, Andrew, to talk about contractor versus or employee versus independent contractor. So we're not done with that, but I just want to see what everybody's questions are as far as the actual reserve fund transfer. So Mr. Rooney, would you like to weigh in here?
Yeah, I have two questions. Is there a possibility, and if so, the likelihood of the position not being reimbursed by the CARES Act?
I don't believe so.
The CARES Act is pretty explicit, John. It says, basically, it's trying to give you money for unbudgeted expenses related to COVID. So at this point, the only thing in the Board of Health budget for fiscal year 21 is the part-time nurse position. So to me, it's pretty clear that we meet the definition. So I don't know why we wouldn't get this. And the others that Mary Lou mentioned that have talked about it agree. I think Andrew Pfaff agrees. Carla, the town accountant, agrees. Now, Carla didn't agree with the benefits piece of it at first, but we asked her to go look at it and she did. So that's good that they've determined that you can also apply for the benefits. It makes perfect sense. There's no reason not to think you wouldn't pick up the total.
The reason that I asked that question is based upon the response to Judy's question in terms of what impact, if any, would this person have with regards to the pandemic? And I believe the answer was none.
I don't think I understand the question.
If I heard Judy correct, she asked what impact or how would our procedures change relative to the pandemic if this person was hired. And I believe the answer was none. It just would allay a future burnout of a person on the staff. Now, maybe I heard it wrong.
No, that was the, that's,
Well,
John,
sorry.
John, that doesn't mean it's not pandemic related, right?
Right.
It's definitely pandemic related, John. This person, the nurse is going to be part of the vaccination program. So Emily D'Amico is already spending an extra, lots of hours because of the pandemic. So yes, these extra hours are clearly pandemic related.
Okay.
And also, Mary Lou, how I interpreted what you said when you said it didn't have any effect was really that under our existing budget, we already have a budget for a part-time nurse, right? This is adding a little bit more hours of the same type of staffing. I mean, I think it does make sense. This position is going to have a relation to the pandemic, is going to help the vaccine get distributed, et cetera, right?
Right. Correct.
Okay.
that's exactly what I was thinking. That it might be much simpler to get the vaccine.
That's right.
If we have a full-time nurse. And if we've learned anything through this pandemic, it would be nice to find it easy to get the vaccine, but I'm not finding it easy at all. So that's why I asked.
Clearly work to be done on that piece of it, but that's beyond the scope of what we're going to do tonight. Okay, Judy, so Mr. Rooney, do you have a second question? I think.
No, I did ask too, Kathy.
Okay, Judy, do you have anything else?
No,
Okay, Andrew D, did you have a chance?
I think I understand it.
Okay, so let's go back to Andrew Pfaff's concern about the type of person, whether you're going to hire a benefited employee by contract or an independent contractor that doesn't get benefits and has to buy their own insurance, et cetera. Okay, so Andrew, let's dive down into why you have an issue as far as one versus the other.
I mean, I could just see this being a temp to perm situation, where you bring on a contractor or a agency to fill, whether it's VNA or something. I don't know. I'm not the public health person or nurse, but you pay a rate that basically would include the cost of benefits. So at a full-time nurse, it's probably around $55 an hour to $65. And we would probably need to increase our reserve fund transfer coverage amount versus what they have budgeted. But that gives you the ability, one, the person you're bringing in, they understand that right now they're temporary, with the idea that we would, could include this position in the budget in the future and they can become permanent. It also, too, allows us to check out the person, test them out, make sure they're a good fit before making them a permanent resource. Something I do all the time in the private sector, especially for some of these roles. Something, it doesn't bind us into a long-term contract. It doesn't bind us into benefits, and it allows us the time to, get the budget approved for next year, get that all worked out while having somebody that can start immediately.
So my reply to that is, I think that given that this position is highly in demand right now, and nurses probably have their pick of several jobs, many jobs that they could apply for, that the less attractive we continue to make it, they're going to have a hard time finding a person. So if we say, okay, it's 1099, not W-2, you got to have your own benefits. I mean, that's a big difference between what most people want. Most people want benefits. They need them. They can't afford to pay their own health insurance. She's got to pay her own self-employment tax, et cetera. And we're already tying their hands a little bit by saying that it can't go beyond 12/31. So I'm not sure that we're doing the right thing by making this even tougher on them finding someone.
But Kathy, what I'm saying is you layer on that price of benefits plus premium. So at the current full-time nurse, it's around $41 an hour. And with benefits adding 25,000, it's 53. Okay. So you put it out to bid as a contract, at 60, 65, 70. It's a huge premium. It's going to cost us more for that time period, but it gives us the flexibility that a 1-year contract doesn't. And again, hopefully this is all reimbursable through the CARES Act, but it gives us flexibility and we get to try the person out before we make a long-term commitment.
So why is that any different than an employee who has a contract through 12/31 that a non-employee with a contract through 12/31? Why is there more flexibility with the latter one than the former?
Because they're not an employee, so they're at will. We're at will. I mean, we're at will employees, but at this town, it's not very easy to get rid of an employee as it would, say, a contractor. It also, contractors are used to having short-term engagements, like a 6-month engagement.
Yeah, but you're
going to go after a different group of people versus somebody that says, we can do a contract through 12/31, but we're not sure what's going to happen after that. I think we would get better people.
Okay, but I don't think nurses are used to short-term contracts and being independent contractors. I think nurses are used to being employees. They work for hospitals and doctors' offices, et cetera. They're employees. So I think this would be pretty strange for a nurse to say, oh, this looks great. I like the independent contract. I think they would really struggle, for the most part, with trying to truly get their arms around this. And I still don't see the difference between a contract.
I have a lot of friends that are traveling nurses that go to 12 different states. But
yeah, that's a unique.
I'm only one person here. This is just my opinion.
I'm not a nurse, so Mary Lou, take.
So I was just going to say that traveling nurse is a completely unique role. I did it when I was younger too. You're in and out, you do your work and you leave. I think Southborough is looking for someone with some continuity, someone to learn about the community and work for the community. And I just wanted to sort of respond to your thought about why don't we just contract with a VNA to do that. Some towns actually do that. It costs them a lot more money. But we check that out. There are no VNAs that will take this on. They can't even do the work they have. So they will not contract with us to send some of their nurses over to do the work that we need to get done. That's not even an option.
Okay.
So anyone else? I'm still not convinced that there is any substantive difference between a contract with, as a town employee through 12/31 versus a contract as an independent contractor through 12/31?
Well, my thing, Kathy, is I wouldn't do the contract as an employee through 12/31. I'd do it through 6/30. Because we're committing to the budget for next year.
And you've got Mary Lou and Heather saying we'll never get somebody if you do it that short term.
I agree. That's why I'm saying contractor. But again, just one person.
Well, I don't think they think there's any difference between a contractor in a 1099 versus W-2 if it's short term. That it's a short term is going to turn people off who have other options, other viable options.
And I don't know if it's worth saying, like, Andrew, the fact that this is an employee that has a contract, and you say well, it's hard to get rid of employees if they don't work out. I know this. This is a contracted employee. Even though they're an employee, their contract ends if we don't continue it. It ends. So it's not like, you know, an employee that has no contract. They're a town employee, and then you have to go through all the things. So
yeah, but we historically have always renewed those contracts. I mean, you know, all of our contracted employees keep getting renewed. I would be more. I would go either way. My thought is either a short-term 1099 contractor, or to your point, I would do a 3-year contract. And I think we, you know, decide now whether we're going to approve that in the budget. But I to get somebody in with this wishy-washy, we're not sure if we're going to approve the budget or not, is no benefit to you guys trying to do your recruiting, which is why I was trying to come up with a solution of getting somebody that's used to not having a long-term gig, that kind of is a, you know, a gun for hire, that it would be okay with a 6-month or even a year engagement, versus, you know, somebody that really wants to know that they have a job in a year. They're at demand now, but who knows what it's going to be like in a year. I wouldn't take that gig. That's just kind of what my thought is.
And I think if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic and public health nurses weren't in such high demand, I might say, okay, but unless we are have a competitive salary with being able to compete with all these other open positions that are out there, we just won't have anybody. Then we have 2 per diem nurses that can only work part-time. And now we have Heather just on board, and she doesn't even have a nurse to support the work that needs to get done. So that's, the longer we go past February 10th without somebody in the position, I don't know, it's.
Right. I am new to this budgeting and staffing, but I almost see, right, we're posting a position for a full-time benefited position. If in a couple weeks from now we don't have any bites, or if it's in February and we don't have bites, that's when we put out, I don't know if that's next, but sort of a contracted, you know, potentially just filling hours.
I think, Heather, you're going to go to plan B if that doesn't work. But it sounds like Mary Lou is willing to try to work with the position through 12/31/21 as far as what they advertise for. And then if they don't get someone, they're going to have to rethink it. But at least let's try and see what happens, right?
Right.
Do we know what the status is or the schedule of delivery of vaccines to Southborough is?
Yeah, John, I was going to give everybody an update. So a whole group has been meeting regularly. Chief Achilles and Heather have met. Chief Achilles took the lead on the vaccine application submission. We have a memorandum of agreement with AFC Urgent Care, because the logistics was going to be such a nightmare for us to try to figure all that out with, especially with not firm staffing. So we have all that in place. We're literally waiting for the allocation of vaccine at this point. So we're in a much better place. And if we can get a public health nurse on, and Heather and a new nurse can work with Chief and Neil Aspesi, I think we're in a really good spot for getting vaccine to Southborough.
And Mary Lou, what is the role of AFC Urgent?
So some of the challenges with the vaccine that's different than a flu clinic or something else is And there's been probably 2 times a week, there's calls from DPH just around vaccine storage, handling, management. All of the vials come in a 10-dose vial. So once you take some vaccine out of that, you have to use the entire vial within a certain period of time. The logistics of carrying out the clinic, I think we're in a good place to do that between police, fire, public works, and public health. But the logistics of getting the vaccine, drawing it up, giving it to people, and then logging all that information into the DPH database that has to be done within 24 hours. Each person you enter into the database is about 20 minutes. And so all that has to be done within 24 hours after you vaccinate somebody. So AFC would take over all of those logistics.
Kathy, can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
I think it would be helpful to hear their FY22 budget, right, and see where we're leaning on some of those items, because it may answer some of the questions. Because, I mean, I think it was pretty clear based on my earlier comment. I don't know that I'd be supporting this position if we didn't have the reserve fund transfer, if we didn't think of this as a backstop for CARES. Because I think I said it in the first time Mary Lou was here, and I've been pretty transparent about it, is I don't think we should be trying to do this as a community. I think we need to be trying to do it as a region. And I don't care who we partner with. And it may be on certain roles. It may not be on, for example, Heather's position may be full-time going forward, but the public health nurse is shared. And the reason I bring this up is I spent 7 hours in a vaccination clinic today. And I can speak to how one was run. That served 25 communities of first responders and went off incredibly seamlessly. And there was one public health nurse there and an army of vaccinators. There was a lot of pre-planning. I do not want to take away from that, but I think Mary Lou has outlined that the team that is now supporting from fire, police, DPW, et cetera, is critical. And I think a public health nurse is critical in the short term to helping execute on some of this. But I also don't think that Southborough, regardless of, if AFC delivers on, spot on, they're going to take care of most of this themselves. But it took about 5 minutes to go start to finish through the cycle, not 20. That's paperwork, vaccination. The longest part was sitting there and waiting for to make sure you didn't have an allergic reaction, which was what I spent most of my day watching. But I just bring that up because that's the perspective I'm coming at it from, as someone that's seen it done now, and knowing that it can be done. And the cost there was not what we're talking about here.
So Jason, I'm going to respectfully disagree with hearing their budget. I really do think it's 2 separate things, and that's why the motion that I've written takes that into account. I'm not ready to lean on their budget tonight, period. I think we've got so much more work to be done with the overall budget that we just can't do this in a vacuum as far as one budget goes. So,
but I think it's important to hear what this public health nurse is going to do once we get beyond vaccination. I don't know the answer, and maybe this is just a question now, but what does the role of a public health nurse, when you evolve from a pandemic, what will he or she be doing, especially given that we've now flipped the director's role, assuming we supported that in a full-time status, to a public health expertise, whereas we previously have heard we were so focused on the environmental side, and we basically have just kind of left that off to the side now, to be completely honest, right? You still have Dennis, but you've done a complete 180. So I don't know how you support a reserve fund transfer and figure out the right date if there's a disagreement on the date, if you don't know what this position may look like longer term.
but why do we need to know beyond 12/31/21 for this specific vote? Because I don't know that they know the answer. Is what I'm trying to get to. We don't know when this pandemic is going to end. We don't know when we're going to be completely, hopefully, mostly vaccinated. So I still think the discussion, because I want to do what you want to do too, which is truly have a robust discussion about the future of this department as far as, the full-time versus part-time versus regionalization. and we need some time to do it. And I think this helps buy us some time to do it. So that's why I still don't think we should marry those two together right now.
I agree, Kathy.
The only reason I asked is not for myself, but I'm hearing what others are saying, and I don't know that
No, there's
we have
definitely
a
some.
path forward.
Yep, so I hear you. No, we've got some.
So I'm fine with 1231, but I'm not hearing, right, just hearing some of Andrew's comments. And I don't know, is anyone here supportive of just going 3 years? I don't know, I haven't heard that, but I just think.
And I would say I would be better with 1231 if I had confidence from Carla that we could still expense that under the CARES Act, even if we we're contractually obligated from a prior year. Like if we sign a contract this year that carries through 1231, when we get into FY22, are we saying that it's budgeted for and we can no longer expense it from 7/1 through 31?
Yes.
So,
Good
on-
point.
Okay, Andrew, just a thought on there though, but when like our baseline is a budget for a part-time nurse, right? Okay.
Unbenefited, yeah.
Okay, that's a fair point. But if there's a carryover into 7/1/21 through 12/31/21, that there's maybe some question about whether it's not CARES reimbursable because it was kind of budgeted in a certain way, you know what I mean, anticipated and planned for it. There would be some negative impact to the budget, but it would only be the difference between the baseline part-time nurse and the full-time benefit, which is a difference.
Correct.
But it's not an entire other person.
No,
I mean,
it's probably the same $30,000, almost, maybe a little bit more. But he's brought up a really good point, which is, can you legitimately, with a clear conscience, only budget the part-time person for fiscal year 22, knowing you've signed a contract for a full-time person through the end of 21? So that's what Andrew Pfaff is saying. And it's an excellent question. I doubt if Carla is going to be able to answer that without consulting with someone in the state. And it does sound a little cute.
Can you repeat that, Kathy, please?
Yeah. So, Tim, what we were discussing a few minutes ago, that Andrew Pfaff has now put a little bit of bug in, is that what we would have done for fiscal year 22 is just continue putting a part-time nurse in the budget. And then we would be able to apply for the additional cost for the first 6 months of fiscal year 22, which is 7/1/21 through 12/31/21, that CARES Act 2 still covers, and gets that piece of reimbursed. So the tricky part is, can you legitimately do that in a budget knowing that you've contracted for the year or for the full time? So is it appropriate to do that?
Yep. Or to be devil's advocate, not budget for the position entirely and expense the whole thing. I don't know. But then you're playing games, but I don't know.
I
Or
think
can you phrase the contract that it can be terminated at any point during the first year, with or without cause? Because then you're not anchoring to a date and you're anchoring to the town's needs. I mean, we have if I'm correct, the SAP, I think you can terminate someone within the first 6 months with or without cause. And the only reason you're not going through the SAP, as I heard it, right, was because of the pay rate. Well, we can fix the pay rate as part of town meeting if you really thought that was the only issue. But I don't know. I'm trying. I do.
See, I think, Jason, if you put that in there, then you're just not going to have anybody apply for it. Who would apply for something they thought they could be terminated? We're back to, it's just too short term at that point. And if there's a lot of
most jobs, Kathy, you can be terminated with or without cause right now, like public and private sector.
Honestly, Jason,
what's the purpose of a contract?
I think it's in. I think the two contracts, Heather's contract and the two contracts we just did, as well as I reviewed lots of other contracts in town before we did these, they all have a clause in there that says something like that. That can be terminated by either party with a notice. I think it's a 30-day notice or something like that, or 2-week notice. It's already in there.
So the bottom line is, we may be sticking ourselves with another reserve fund transfer for fiscal year 22 by doing this, the way it's worded going to the end of 21, based on what Andrew Pfaff just brought up. So there's definitely some, I think there's much assurance that the cost is going to be covered through 6/30/21, and I'm now not quite so sure it's going to be covered for the next 6 months after that. So we would possibly have to do a reserve fund transfer if it's not.
Yeah, and I think we're still going to be in COVID, related stuff at that point in time. So I think having the full time makes sense. I'm just trying to point out something.
All right, so let's at least look at the motion. So Jason, can I share my screen?
Yes. Should be good.
I'm not seeing anything yet.
I'm not there yet, Andrew. I really struggle with this. It's more than just hitting buttons. So let me just. Now?
Not yet. And Kathy, we did have a couple comments on the chat, so I don't know if we want to open this up to public comment or not.
All right, well, let me get this on here first. Now?
Nope. Oh, yeah.
Still not?
Yeah,
Got it.
I can see it.
It says I am. Okay, all right. So
Yes.
there's the proposed motion. Okay, so we've got some chats.
Tim had a comment.
Tim Martell?
Tim Litt.
Okay, so I just don't see the chats. Yes, I do. No, I do. Okay, now I do. All right, so Jason, you want to let Tim in so he can.
Or if anybody has any questions, raise
Yeah,
their
and I think we should, if bare minimum, we should read it out loud. I don't know. Tim, raise your hand if you want to come in and speak verbally to it, or if you just want us, otherwise we'll just read it off the chat. All right,
He
there
raised
he
it.
is. All right, he should be in.
Kathy, did you want that to say greater or lesser?
Possibly. Where do you see it, Tim?
Line 2.
Yeah, lesser is right. You agree. I agree. So, hi, Tim. We haven't seen you in a long time.
Well, I've seen you.
Okay, so go ahead.
Well, I had a couple of comments on this. I think the overall one is that I have been attending the Board of Health meetings for quite a while now, and their conclusion has been that they need a full-time public health nurse in order to fulfill their public functions, regardless of whether we're in a pandemic or not. So I think part of your conversation here is really one of assuming you allow the Board of Health to determine what it needs to do. It's just a question of how do you pay for it, not a question of, hire this kind of person or that. What I put in the chat is that I think that, anyone who you hire for a full-time benefited position through the end of the year will leave on the first of the next year if the position isn't added to the budget. Because as Andrew Pfaff has said, I'm not a nurse, but I wouldn't sign up for a position that suddenly turns into a half-time position on, after 10 months or whatever that turns out to be. And I also don't think that you're going to get the quality of candidate who you want for a long-term relationship with the town if you're playing these kinds of games or tricks or whatever you want to call it going through these gyrations, let's say, to wiggle through the funding sources. So I mean, if I were there, I would encourage you to separate the discussion into the one that says, do you need a full-time nurse? And assuming that Mary Lou says and Heather say, yes, we need a full-time nurse. This is where we're going to go. This is the budget we're going to propose. Then it becomes an advisory question of, gee, is there a clever way to pay for it? As opposed to trying to constrain how the Board of Health fills this need for the town.
So Tim, I'd say first, we're not trying to do anything tricky here. We're trying to solve a problem. They can't hire someone for 3 years right now. There's no budget for it. They have no ability to fund that right now until town meeting gets here. So there's just not, we don't have that much flexibility as far as what we can do tonight. We can do what we have said that we're trying to do here, which is basically take it through 12/31/21, but it really may mean that we're going to reserve fund transfer the last 6 months based on what Andrew Pfaff brought up. And I agree with you. I don't think that giving them the comfort that they can hire someone for less than 4 months is going to help get someone. So I totally agree with that piece of it. But you can't hire someone now for 3 years because there's no budget to do that until we get to town meeting.
Well, what you would do is you put in the contract, as you put in all contracts, that it's subject to funding by the town. That's standard municipal contract language. And, the Board of Health, in good faith, will put forth a budget that covers it because they're saying they need the position. Whenever we do a 3-year contract, the 3-year contract obliges the town, according to my understanding, but you can't commit to the out years with funds from this year. So unless it's funded by an article, all municipal contracts are, subject to available funds. And in fact, I went through some explorations on this when I was doing some consultant contracts for the Municipal Technology Committee. And, I consulted with town council on that, and it's very standard language that says, the contract is subject to funding. I don't have the words at the tip of my tongue, but I could dig them up if I had to. So, I really think there's a bridge question, which is the one that's before you, that says, can you use the reserve fund to backstop, the time between now and the end of the fiscal year? And then it's up to the Board of Health to convince you and town meeting to approve a budget that is sufficient to cover, the out years or the next year of however long the contract turns out to be. And I didn't mean, by the way, to imply that there was anything nefarious when I said tricky. I meant tricky just in the sense of it's, you're trying creatively to find ways to structure this so that the funding comes from somewhere else, according to the rules, and that's fine.
Well, creative is a much better word than tricky. Tricky doesn't sound very good, with the public meeting.
I apologize for not saying creative.
Okay.
You know me, I'm straightforward about these things.
Yes, I do know you, and you are. That's good most of the time, but I don't like tricky. Okay, we've got to do something here.
Do you want to move this and second it and then have discussion?
Yeah. Okay, so does everybody had a chance to read the motion because it's long, so I want to see it before I read it. Okay, so I move that the advisory committee agrees to approve a reserve fund transfer for fiscal year 21 in July of 21 under the following circumstances. The amount to be approved shall not exceed the lesser of $29,000 or the deficit in account number 512, Board of Health, as of 6/30/21. The actual approval of the reserve fund transfer will not take place until July 21, when all reserve fund transfers are considered. The reserve fund transfer will only be approved in July 2021 if the additional cost of the full-time nurse for the remainder of fiscal year 21 has not been reimbursed from other sources. Additional cost means the non-budgeted cost of a full-time nurse for fiscal year 21. Only the unreimbursed portion of the non-budgeted cost of the full-time nurse will be approved in July 2021. This motion does not prevent the approval of other related reserve fund transfers for fiscal year 21 at a later date. This motion is approved pending that the full-time nurse have an initial contract that ends no later than 12/31/21.
Second.
Further discussion?
Yeah, help me understand why the first date is 6/30 and not 12/31. This is not a prepayment.
On the third line,
Yes, please.
the amount to be approved should exceed the lesser than. Because this reserve fund transfer is only for fiscal year 6/30/21. We may have to do another one for 6/30/22, but this one's, we're only talking about 6/30/21 right now.
Thank you.
So Kathy, I would probably remove the entire last sentence. Just
I added that for Jason's benefit. That's what
Yeah.
Jason wanted. So I don't want to remove that until Jason weighs in.
yeah, I mean, I just thought
I want to
is,
hear what, let me hear what Andrew wants
Yeah,
to.
I mean, my thought is, we're approving the 29,000, and we're basically stating that we can't guarantee that, next year there'll be a reserve fund, or there'll be budget for it, or whatever. We can guarantee, we can say we'll have 6 months worth of that increase.
And by doing that, you are giving the Board of Health more flexibility to try to end up with a contract that actually allows them to find the person that they want.
But the other question is whether or not the chief procurement officer can enter into that contract for a multi-year without any commitment. I don't know.
Well, they do
That's
for
your
department
budget.
heads all the time.
It's true.
So the Board of Health can definitely do the contract, Andrew. They've
Okay.
gotten a legal opinion on this. They can do this. And we know we could do 3-year or less contracts. That's
Yeah.
fine.
I think the question is whether or not at some point in time that might have to be terminated early. We can't say that it won't.
Because of the funding. So Mary Lou, this is, if I get rid of the sentence, this is going to give you much more flexibility as far as what you do, just so you know. So Jason, remove it.
Well, I guess, how does this prevent, I forget who said it now at this point, this being a temporary to a permanent position until the right amount of time to vet this? Because we're going to hear that they're looking to increase Heather's position from part-time to full-time. So we're taking 2 part-time positions to full-time, potentially next year. I'm just trying to make sure, this doesn't, I understand the retention risk by limiting it, and I don't want to do that, and I understand that. But at the same time, I don't believe this is the right model based on what I've heard to date for the long term until we hear more. And I just have some convincing that needs to be done. So I'm open to any idea of how to make that, because I think I'm hearing that there's similar sort of comments on this advisory board of no one's ready to kind of endorse the longer term plan. Obviously, we haven't heard all about it yet either. But at the same time, I don't want this motion to then give basically permission to continue for the longer term.
Well, it will if we get rid of the last sentence. And it gives them more flexibility to sign a contract that they believe is the right contract for the persons they want. And then the way that we would, the only way we would have to undo a longer term contract would be to not approve, basically recommend a budget for fiscal year 22 that doesn't include it. And town meeting would have to approve that. The Board of Health could stand up and say, nope, we want the full time. The town could then say yes to that and not support the budget we recommend. So that's what could happen. But it does give them the flexibility to try to find the person they want under the circumstances that the person would agree to. So that's what we're doing here. And I'm with you, Jason, as far as trying to look at the bigger picture, look at the regionalization that we think the state is starting to support, that Paul Pazinski thought made sense for certain things. I'm with you. I'm trying to make sure we still have the flexibility to do that with the actual long term.
I mean, Representative Dykeman told the Board of Selectmen a couple of weeks ago that they're coming out with a grant program to incentivize Board of Health to work together, regional, like, and regionalize sometimes is the wrong term, but I'm okay removing it, but I think obviously the minutes are going to be very clear with, I don't think there's a long-term intention behind this yet until more vetting is done. So I would caution Mary Lou and anyone else responsible for the contract, to make sure that you have a clause to get out, because you may find there's a better solution going forward. I mean, Heather's been here a week or two, right? Like, I'd like to give her a chance to study this and offer a point of view. I think, Mary Lou, you and your other board members have indicated, at least some of you, that you may not continue. So I also don't want to saddle a future Board of Health with, your decisions. As much as I respect where you're trying to go and I understand why you're trying to do it, I'm just trying to make sure we don't lock ourselves into or bind ourselves into a corner for what I, at least at the current point in time, believe is a short-term issue.
Okay, so I don't know what else we can say. This will be in the minutes. Mary Lou, you're going to have a lot more flexibility than you would have with that sentence in there. So I'm going to. Okay.
Kathy, I like the sentence in there.
Okay.
Kathy, can I make a comment?
Uh-huh.
I share Jason's sentiments exactly, and I think that the natural, Jason has suggested we simultaneously look at the fiscal year 22 Board of Health budget and considering this. But I think we, as you pointed out, we're just not ready to do that. I mean, I've heard the whole discussion. I can't think of a better way of dealing with this problem than the one that you have presented here. I think that the last, sentence you have highlighted there, this is not, guaranteeing that a contract would go that long. I mean, I think we know some of the reason it's there is to give some more flexibility to try to get someone actually in the position. My point is, I think it's basically unavoidable that we have to go in this two-step process and first try to plug in the hole for the rest of this year. And then I guess it may be as soon as next week, right? Or the following week that we have the full discussion of the Board of Health.
No, that's fine. I mean, we're going to talk about the budget as far as that goes. We're going to talk about it
tonight.
Yes, they're here for two things tonight. So we're about to get into their budget tonight.
So then we're going to be asked to, is the budget going to have a request to fund this position out through 6/30/22?
Absolutely.
It is, right?
Absolutely. They're asking for full-time admin, full-time health director, and full-time nurse in that budget. So it's true. So
we're not going to vote on that tonight. We're just going to hear it.
So it's 7:40, and I told Mr. Butler we'd be there at 7. So this is what I want to do. I'm going to leave the motion the way it is, and we'll see if this passes. If not, we'll take the sentence out and see if that passes. Okay, so we've had a motion made, we've had a second, we've had discussion. All in favor of the motion as written with the last sentence still in.
One thing, Kathy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Did we agree on the 29,000, or were we going to increase it by a factor for benefits?
Well, Tim, I think Kathy said that she thinks that there's extra money in the benefits budget. Anyway,
right. We just didn't finalize that. So I just wanted.
Do we have confirmation of that, or we think?
No, Andrew or Jason, we won't until the end of the year either. So there's no confirmation to get either way. There's still that's just a very uncertain budget until we get to the end of the year.
So, Kat, did you want to increase it?
I'm happy to put a different number here. I can add, 30% to it, Tim, or I can leave it alone. So whatever.
Well, we'd have to put a separate line item, Kathy, for that. We'd have to basically say we would approve a reserve fund transfer of $10,000, $15,000 from the employee benefit line item, right?
I can add a sentence and just say, additionally, we will also potentially approve the estimated cost of the benefits for the full-time position, estimated to be 30 times 30 is $9,000.
I think that would be good to at least hold the money in the reserve fund pending actually needing it, to Tim's point, just in case we go over.
Okay, so we will also agree to approve an additional reserve fund transfer for fiscal year 21 equal to the additional cost of the fringe benefits for the full-time nurse estimated at $9,000.
Or what about, or the deficit in account number blank? The lesser
Well,
of.
yeah, I mean, that deficit could be there regardless.
Okay, you're right.
Okay, if, I could say if needed in the benefits budget.
That's good. Yeah.
So Kathy, if are you planning to withdraw your motion now with that addition? So you have to withdraw the original because
Yeah.
before you make a new motion?
I probably.
Okay. So if you're planning to go that route, then what I would also recommend, at least from my perspective, is that you remove this last sentence as well. But instead, what I would like to see removed in the minutes, if you're open to it, is that the Board of Health continue to work with Carla and the town administrator to make sure that the way that they structure the contract doesn't box us into a hole from a CARES perspective. I'm not gonna put it in the motion, but just, I think that's what we're trying to do, right? So we're trying not to box ourselves into any sort of hole. But obviously we can't write a contract for anyone.
Okay, so you're suggesting remove the last sentence, which Tim Martell wants in there. I think a couple more may want in there. So you want that removed?
Well, I think we should just discuss it. So we vote once, unless we agree that there's going to be a split vote, and I don't know which way obviously it's going, but I think we should have a discussion about that because I strongly believe that it should have no end date later than 12/31/21. But I'm not a CARES Act expert, and none of us are, right? No matter how much we study it and look at it in our full-time or volunteer roles, I just think that CARES Act clearly had the intent of funding public health, right? And clearly public health has unprecedented needs right now. What I don't think anyone knows is what the needs are going to be beyond, once we get to hopefully herd immunity, right? So that's why I'm I believe that, but I also don't know if it belongs in the motion. It is more the minutes.
See, I don't think it belongs in the motion either, Jason. I think it's in the minutes. This is getting to be an unwieldy motion. So I think it belongs in the minutes. I was trying to, but I think it does not belong in this motion. I think it goes in the minutes that we absolutely have encouraged, and we'll discuss with the town accountant that we really need to try to end up with a contract that does not box us in.
Then I would be in favor of removing the last line.
Okay, so that's Andrew P.
Yep.
So you want the last sentence to come out?
Correct.
Okay, well, Tim wants it in, so I'm going to leave it in for the moment, okay? And we're going to vote on it, and then if we don't have a majority, we'll take it out and see what we get, okay? All right, so I am removing the previous motion. I'm going to do this again, so this is a whole new motion. So I move that the advisory committee agrees to approve a reserve fund transfer for fiscal year 21 in July 2021 under the following circumstances. The amount to be approved shall not exceed the lesser of $29,000 or the deficit in account number 512 Board of Health as of 6/30/21. We'll also agree to approve an additional reserve fund transfer for fiscal year 21 equal to the additional cost of the fringe benefits for the full-time nurse estimated at $9,000 if needed in the benefits budget. The actual approval of the reserve fund transfer will not take place until July 2021 when all reserve fund transfers are considered. The reserve fund transfer will only be approved in July 2021 if the additional cost of the full-time nurse for the remainder of fiscal year 21 has not been reimbursed from other sources. Additional cost means the non-budgeted cost of a full-time nurse for fiscal year 21. Only the unreimbursed portion of the non-budgeted cost of the full-time nurse will be approved in July 21. This motion does not prevent the approval of other related reserve fund transfers for fiscal year 21 at a later date. This motion is approved pending that the full-time nurse have an initial contract that ends no later than 12/31/21. So is there a second on that?
Second.
That's Mr. Mooney, Claire. Okay,
No,
so,
no, that was me.
I'm sorry, Tim, I knew it was you. I just said Mr. Mooney. So that was Mr. Martell. Okay, any further discussion?
Yeah, Kathy, my only continued concern is whether or not any of these phrases jeopardize or any possibility of getting it reimbursed. And I don't know if we have the capacity in town for someone to look at this and give the green light.
So John, we don't think it does. We believe that as long as this is going to be a reserve fund transfer down the road, which is all it is, we're not actually approving the reserve fund transfer tonight. They're not taking money out of our $180,000 reserve fund account and moving it to Board of Health. So Board of Health budget is staying the same as it is. And so the cost that they're going to incur is going to go into their budget. It's going to go negative. And therefore it looks like there's just, I'm very confident of this. 100% no, but I'm very confident, highly confident that this is exactly what CARES Act is supposed to fund. And therefore by doing it the way we're doing it, we're not putting this money in their budget. So it is going to be unbudgeted costs that we're going to apply for.
And this is Mary Lou. John, Carla asked specifically about reserve fund transfer, and they said, irregardless if there's a reserve fund transfer or not, it's reimbursable. She has that specifically in an email.
Okay, thank you, Mary Lou.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second, and any further discussion? Okay, so roll call vote. Judy. You got to unmute, Judy.
Sorry, aye.
Cook, aye. Andrew Dennington,
Aye.
Tim Martell,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Mr. Pfaff, Andrew
Aye.
Pfaff, Mr. Rooney.
Aye.
Okay, so I'm surprised, 7-0. Okay, so Mary Lou, you've got your reserve fund backup for doing this.
Great. Thank you very much.
Oh, that took a while. Okay, so now let's turn to what's left to discuss about your budget proposal for fiscal year 22. So I've got that on ClearGov. So I would bring over and share this now. Is everybody seeing the budget?
Yeah.
Yes? Somebody say yes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so Board of Health is right here. They are proposing a significant increase from fiscal year 21 for fiscal year 22. Let me scroll up a little bit here. Okay, so they are proposing going from 170,717 for the current year to 393,628, and obviously it's all salaries. So I'm going to go down. So see where my cursor is going down. So they are asking for full-time admin. Right now they've got a part-time admin. They're asking for a full-time nurse. They're asking for a full-time health director. All three of those positions are part-time for fiscal year 21, which we should definitely know by this point. Maybe before we get started, I had trouble getting the numbers that make up the 292. If you look at the memo that was sent to us from your admin, Barbara, she's got three numbers and they add up to 248,219. She's got the admin at 53,219. She's got the full-time nurse at 85, and she's got full-time director at 110. So those three add up to 248,219. So I don't know where the 292 is coming from. Do you?
I don't, and I don't have access to ClearGov, so I have only known I have a Excel spreadsheet, which is what you're saying. So I don't know
All
why.
right, so we'll get that straightened out as far as what it is. So the 16,800, just so everybody knows, that's per diem nurses. And then when you go down to operating expenses here, so the biggest change there is under contracted services, which is basically the person who does a lot of the septic inspections, et cetera. So they want to add, it looks like a per diem health agent there. So that would be the full-time, pretty much full-time person. Now he is 1099, he's unemployed. So that's him. And then they want to add another $12,000 for contracted services. So that's all I'm going to say before I turn this back over to Tim and Mary Lou as far as discussing anything else anybody wants to see in here.
So I just want to make a comment on those contracted services. So
Yep.
like you said, those are all 1099s. It's dependent on the work. We didn't have enough this year to do everything that needed to get done. So it really depends on, you know, those inspections. But also wanted to make a note that all of those inspections bring in fees. And I know it doesn't factor into the budget, but so of that this year, of the 52,080, we brought in almost $50,000 into the general fund. And so that would be continuing going forward, even if with the additional independent contractor to complete inspections as needed, there would still be fees that would come in. About 90% of those dollars come back to the town and to the general fund for the fees.
Noted. Tim Martell, do you want to start off? Do you want to say anything here as far as this budget goes?
I'm sorry, I just took a bite of my sandwich. You caught me at a bad time.
I knew that.
I did not have the opportunity to meet with the Board of Health to review this budget. So I think I don't have any particular insights to offer. I'm sorry.
We're going to have, more time to discuss it, but I just want to make sure you had your chance to weigh in before we started going around.
No, I would turn it over to the Board of Health to present this.
All right. So what else do you want to say, Heather or Mary Lou, as far as the proposed budget? What do you want us to know? So I guess what we need to understand is why you think these positions need to survive COVID.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question that I'm hearing tonight. So there's clearly not a good understanding of what we do in the health department and what is needed to be done in the health department. We, in discussion and review of the work that needs to get done, irregardless of COVID. And we're going to have some catch up to do because of COVID work, because everybody's focused solely on COVID right now. There are things that aren't, that are going to need catch up afterwards as well. But the work that local health departments are being required, mandated, and expected to do have changed tremendously in the last 5 to 7 years. If anybody got a chance to look at the blueprint that was put out by the state health department, you can clearly see the expectations of what they expect local health departments to do. At one point, as we did our review and analyzed the blueprint and how do we ensure that we can carry out all those expected things for Southborough, we had originally had in a 1.5 public health nurse, a full-time health director, a 1.5 public health nurse, and a full-time admin. And really understanding that budgets are tight and money is tight, and we need to skim wherever we can and be able to do what needs to get done. And that's how we got to this budget. As you can see, there's bare bones in everything else that's on this. I mean, there really is no room. It's really the salaries. And to Jason's point, looking at regionalization, yes, the state is coming out with grants. They've been coming out with grants for years. We have had many grants over the years, but grants don't fund positions, and grants are limited, and you have to manage the grant, you have to report the way it's expected, and you don't always get the grant to support the work that needs to get done that you're mandated again. So we feel strongly that we need to have the staff to do the mandated and required public health activities. And grants are a bonus. And grants are maybe will allow us to do some extra public health work that aren't mandated, are nice to do. As far as regionalizing and maybe sharing cross-jurisdictional services, we're all for it, but right now the structure isn't there to do it. Once Heather gets up to speed and she's able to talk with other towns and see what towns are willing to share services, what kind of services they're willing to share, maybe there's some of the other activities we can do, but most likely they're going to be under the contracted services, not under the core staff that we need, a public health director, a public health nurse, and an admin person.
Okay, can you give us some examples of things that we're not doing that we should be doing? Not COVID, but just normal day-to-day stuff?
Sure, okay. I think, I mean, and if this does go to town meeting, obviously, I'll have to do a lot more explaining of all the specific work that the public health department is responsible to do.
Well, Mary Lou, I would suggest you be prepared to do that because inevitably this amount of an increase is going to have a good discussion.
Okay, and part of that was looking at other towns. We can look at the complete analysis of how we got to where we are, and what else do you think people, residents, yourself, what do people want to know besides, I think to Kathy's point, what do we need to do that we're not doing? Besides that, what else?
Kathy, if I may, Mary Lou, I guess one of the questions that I have, and I suspect others would have at town meeting, is you've indicated that the role of the Board of Health has changed over the last 5 to 7 years. And I guess my question bluntly is, why are we all of a sudden now realizing that, and why do we need these additional positions? So I think it would be very important to understand, again, what is not getting done that should be getting done and perhaps was not done over the last number of years. Because, I mean, obviously you recognize this is a significant increase in the budget. And it's one that I do think you're going to need to have some explanation or presentation at town meeting. And also for us, unless other people understand, I need to understand why these additional people are needed and why have they not been included in prior budgets. That's where I'm coming from, Mary Lou, if you understand that.
No, I totally understand. Believe me, after because I've been in public health for 30 years and worked with many towns when I worked for DPH. And
also, please don't think that I am in any way disputing what you say is needed. I just don't have the information or knowledge to get to the point where the budget increases this amount by this amount.
No, I hear you, and I get that, but I guess it's been a eye-opening experience for me in the last 2 months, 3 months that I've been really diving into the budget, meeting with residents, meeting with committees and boards, at how little really residents know what the health department does, is mandated to do and required to do. And maybe that's on us that we haven't kept everybody informed. We worked hard with the annual report to really show, which really never has been done, like the detail of all the work that is done and required to be done. So I hear you, and maybe that's partly the board's fault for not making it more aware. But it's clearly obvious to me that we need to do a better job at really educating residents about how fire safety and public health really create public safety for the town of Southborough. It's really a three-pronged triangle. And for a long time in Southborough, it's kind of been a two-pronged triangle. And we're trying to make it a three-pronged triangle to make sure that Southborough has what it's need for public safety. And Heather, I don't know if you have additional thoughts, bigger perspective.
Well, the initial perspective of how this public health in the state of Massachusetts was set up was through the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, overseeing 351 towns and cities, and they have the jurisdiction within their own towns, where the other states are set up generally with county public health departments, so on a county level. So this was how this was originated from the state. I think I'll look into more. I think Worcester, since I've been working at UMass, I know a little bit about Worcester. It does do some regional public health, but that's not how the state has traditionally jurisdiction funding. I know you apply as a city, or town to the state for federal money that comes through the state. In terms of just in speaking with Emily, just in the past week, I know we're behind on a lot of our inspections. Some of them need Emily or a medical sign off.
Yeah, Heather and Mary Lou, I didn't mean to interrupt, but again, what I just don't understand is that all these other comparable towns have at least double, if not more, the staff of the Board of Health. And now we're looking to try to, catch up, if you will. So I guess in addition to understanding the role and what the Board of Health does as a component or maybe as a subset, what we have not been doing that the other towns are doing. Because given the deficit now, I have to suspect there's a lot of stuff that they are doing that we are not.
Yeah,
I agree
Mary
with
Lou
John.
can probably speak better to this, but I think that in terms of public health, collaborating with the schools, with youth and family services, with mental health, with food insecurity, all things that impact health that I think we're not doing in Southborough.
I think, John, it's more, our health department has been more of an inspectional service. It really hasn't been a public health department. And can you get by with just doing, just the inspections? We probably could. But at some point in the near future, the state is going to require cities and towns, if you're going to get money, you need to be certified.
Yeah.
We are not even close to being certified right now. We're not even doing, and maybe that's what we need to show. What do we need to be able to do to get certified as a health department? And I can clearly spell that out in a presentation that would make it easier to understand. It's like some cities and towns have a volunteer fire department. Is that the right thing to do? I don't know. Maybe they don't have the budget to have a full-time fire department. Some cities and towns are part of these regional collaboratives, but they also have a health director and they have other things, but they could never be certified as a health department either. So therefore they would not be eligible for state or federal funding if they're not certified. This puts us in a position to become certified, to then become eligible for state and federal funding as the state moves to implement this blueprint that just was published in 2019.
Yeah, and again, don't think I'm not trying to criticize the expertise in your request for staffing, but I think in terms of the explanation, there are some holes, if you will, in my knowledge, which I have to assume other people have similar holes that would be helpful when asking for a vote on this.
No, I hear you, John, and this is what's come out really to me is that we need to do a better job in informing everybody on what we do, what we need to do, and what, you know, the future should look like, and why this staffing is needed for us to be able to move into the 21st century. I know we need to do a better job with that.
Thank you, Kathy. That's all the questions I had.
One thing I want to bring up real quick, and we're going to cut this off at 8:30 to start talking about the advisory bylaws. So I'm talking to John Butler, and because I don't think he can see my chat answer. Anyway, one thing that Mr. Butler recommended when he did the MSW, the Municipal Solid Waste report and study, he would like to see the Board of Health also license private haulers. So there's one more thing that may end up in your to-do list too, Mary.
That already is on our list. It's just got added this year on top of everything else. So you're right. And that's going to expand. That's going to be more work, not less work, as we move forward.
All right, so any other questions about why they believe that the positions that they have now should all become full-time 7/1/21 and not necessarily related to COVID? And that's what I think we've got to get our arms around, is that. So any other questions?
Maybe a comment, maybe reinforcing, obviously, what I believe Mary Lou said before in response to one of my questions was, as Heather gets up to speed, right, and gets to know our neighboring communities in particular, like they may be facing the same issues. I think it'd be important to understand that. And I just would be wary of the comparative town analysis, though, because I think one of the problems there is it only included towns bigger than us or equal to us in terms of population. But I don't know, are there more restaurants in those towns or less restaurants? Or and I know, I'm not saying there's never a perfect comparison, no matter whenever we do that stuff. And I would just say, as you think through, and I think you've heard all of our feedback, so I'm not going to repeat any of it, but as you think through some of these positions, I think one of the things I want to hear about is if you could choose one that's the most important to get to full-time, year one, which is it? What's the next most important, right? Like if we had to start making tough decisions, right? Even if everyone agreed with everything that was being said, like what is going to be your priority? And also think about, I'm not in favor of adding benefits, but if we have to add benefits, we have to add benefits. But do these have to be 40 hours just because you're going to full time? Like, is that what these positions are going to require? Or is there a medium ground, which it doesn't save you a ton of money, but I think anything counts. So just things to think about. I don't expect a response tonight. And then Kathy, this is not fair to Mary Lou, but we heard from John Parent that he manages all cell phones in the town, except for those that are reimbursed through fire or police union contracts. But yet we see in the Board of Health that there's a wireless phone. So I think this is not a Mary Lou question. This is more of a Mark. John is like, what are we doing with things like that town-wide in making sure we don't have redundancy in budgets? I'm not saying I don't support it. It's just, I think it exists in multiple spots.
And I agree, that's not fair to Mary Lou, but we'll bring it up. So Heather, I hear what you're saying as far as what we don't do and where the focus has been historically. So this is starting to make sense as far as what you're asking. We just got to think about it more and really discuss it and see what we think. So we may invite you back, give you a little bit more time to get settled in too, so that you really can start thinking about what this town should be doing to provide a robust Department of Health to the people who live here. All right, so that's Jason. Judy?
No questions.
Okay. Andrew Pfaff?
One of the questions I had that kind of echoes what Jason was talking about with the cell phones was I saw a new printer on here. I think we've kind of talked about that when we've had Tom LaFlamme and those guys in before on, how many do we need per building? Should we lease them versus purchase? So that's just one, again, I think as we get a new IT director, we just got to look at, do we really need a $10,000 printer? Can we share one amongst different departments? Should we lease them versus purchasing? That was just one that stuck out to me, but I don't know if I have an opinion at this point in time, just food for thought.
Yeah, I think that's good food for thought. So I agree, we should look at that.
Yep. And then sure.
can I just respond to that? So right now we're sharing a printer with the building department. We can't legally share with the building department when we are sharing personal health information. It has to be a dedicated printer that when information is printed out on that printer, it's only one person is seeing it, it's protected. So it's from a public health perspective, that's where we differ a little bit, but
Yeah, I would back that up and say that our IT department is not capable of supporting the HIPAA requirements of the Board of Health.
Yep. All right, so we will, so we hear you, Mary Lou, as far as why you think you need your own. I'm not sure you need that bigger one, but we will look at that too. Is that it, Andrew P?
I think the only other thing is, Mary Lou, we're looking at other towns and we're trying to compare based upon what your current budget is now and the size of our town. We would be number 8 in the state in terms of per capita spending on the Board of Health. So I think it's just, I think we need to just kind of understand, we want better services. Are we comparing ourselves against bigger towns that have the funding available to do that? I'm not saying it's not warranted and we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, as we start to look at ourselves against a Hopkinton or a Weston, we jump ahead of them in terms of per capita cost.
But how can that be, Andrew, if they've got every one of those, Weston, Wayland, Sudbury, and Hopkinton had at least 1, and in one case there was 1.5. They're about the same size, so how can they not be right there with us if?
Wayland would be higher. Weston is not quite as high. I don't know how they're funding it. Maybe there's part-time resources. Also, what is their population? You have to look at all that stuff.
They're a little bit higher, but not much.
some of those positions have come on this year. So
Okay.
I don't know if they're reflected in that budget, just like we're struggling to try to fill that. I mean, several health departments have just hired full-time public health nurses that they've never had a public
Yeah.
health nurse before. They've contracted with BNAs and BNAs can't do it anymore. So now they have to hire their own nurse. So I don't know if it's a good comparison until you can see the 22 budget for everybody and then compare it.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is older data, so it does make sense.
How old is it, Andrew?
I think it's 2019, fiscal year 19.
So that might explain some of it too. Is that it, Andrew, for you?
That's all I got.
Andrew D.
I don't have any specific question, but basically I just want to underscore again, John's comment. For me, I really come at this, this is a budget which we didn't pay as much attention to the last time. I just need to understand, to be informed, just as totally specific as possible. What are the individual tasks? For example, like for each of these positions, what people do on a day-to-day basis, concrete specific examples, and even just talking about inspections, what types of facilities are inspected, how are they inspected, the number of places that have to be inspected, etc. That's the type of information. There's not a question, there's not a piece of information that's too basic for me. I just need to understand it at a very simple level. Thank you.
Heather, when you have been here another couple of weeks, and I know you're busy, but could you possibly write a memo that we'll share with the Board of Selectmen that basically does start off with what we do today, and then what you believe we should be doing based on state recommendations, what you know from your background, et cetera, so that we really can understand exactly where you guys think this department should go if we're doing what we should be doing? What do you think we should be doing? Is that possible?
A specific example of that is, Mary Lee, when you were talking about required public health activities, I don't know what that, just as concrete as possible, what are the public health activities that are required? And why is more staffing needed for that?
I think it's clear that we need to do a better job. So I think Heather and I will definitely detail very specifically those activities. We can do that.
So
Thank you
Mary
very
Lou,
much.
you're right when you said the very first meeting when we met you, when you said, no one paid attention to the Board of Health until now. I think you're right. So we're trying to pay attention, but we just need help being educated.
Yeah, I get it.
And Mary Lou, based upon my comments, if you want to share the memo with me, and perhaps we can collaborate before the final memo is done to answer some of those questions. I'm always around.
That would be great. And just, you can say, no, I need more information than this, or, you know, explain this more. Yeah, that would be great. That would be helpful, so that we're giving you the information you need to make an educated decision. I don't feel like you have enough information to make an educated decision right now.
I would like to also, as you're crafting this, I would urge you to do it with town meeting as your audience.
Okay.
Yeah, this would be a dry run for town meeting. That's a great idea, Tim. So this could definitely be your dry run.
Okay.
Yes, there.
And Mary Lou and Heather, one other thing that I thought of that we talked about in a prior meeting that I don't know if it's made its way to you guys yet, but any revenue generating business that charges fees, to take a second look at those fees, a market rate them, or, you know, some of our fees haven't been looked at in 10, 15 years, and we're way below market. So as we're getting into a tough budget season, you know, look at the fees we're charging. Can we try to boost those up a little bit? You know, not being extreme, but also keeping in mind what the neighboring communities are doing. So kind of working on the other side of the, you know, the accounting ledger certainly helps as well.
Okay.
Jason, are you finished with your questions? You've come to the bottom now, so it messes me up when people change positions. Have you asked?
Yeah, I think I already went on this. So yes, I'm good.
All right, Judy?
I'm all set.
All right. Okay, so I think we're going to cut this off now. Heather, thank you. Welcome to Southborough. I hope we haven't done anything to make you nervous here, but this is what we do. Mary Lou, you are great for doing everything you did to get this done, but you got your reserve fund vote, so that part's done. And then we're just going to continue to discuss this until we really understand where we need to be so that we can vote with knowledge.
It sounds good. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you guys too.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. So John left for a minute. He's coming back at 8:30, so we've got about 10 minutes to do some other things. So let's just try to get as much.
John's still on. I don't know if he wants to come over. He just.
Okay, so he's a panelist, right? So he's in.
He's now a panelist. He wasn't. So John, you're in if you're there. Otherwise, I'll bring you back in at 8:30.
And if you're there, John, you need to unmute. I mean, he told me he's coming back at 8:30, so let's assume that's what he did. Probably got something to eat. Okay, so let's do a couple things that are really easy to knock out. So let me do the chair report. Two quick things. Town meeting is definitely not going to be March 20th. The Board of Selectmen, town clerk, and town moderator decided that last night. They don't know when it's going to be, but it's not March 20th. So they still think it's going to be May or June, which is, now, I don't understand exactly how this is going to happen. I don't know what they're doing to push it legally, but Mark Purple did tell me in an email that gives everybody more time to review warrant articles. So he clearly is not planning on posting the warrant or send the warrant to print on February 20th. So we've got more time to get our votes in, which is great, even though we decided we weren't going to rush anyway. But it looks like we're going to have more time before we have to even meet their deadline as far as the printed warrant. The second one, speaking of fees, I did send the letter right before this meeting started to the Board of Selectmen as far as asking them to review all fees, and I copied everybody on our essential copy. So you've got a copy of it. So we will see where that goes. I didn't try to list all the fees because there's a ton of them, and I knew I'd miss them if I did. So I just said all fees. Okay.
Kathy, you said you copied us?
I sent, yes, I did. I sent it to Mark. I didn't copy you on what I sent. Yes, I did too. Yes, I did. I did copy you.
I didn't get it. So maybe, I don't know if there's an issue with the group.
I saw that.
I don't know if anyone else.
I know it's wrong. I know it's wrong. It's me. If you use your regular email to try to send something to AC, it's not going to go. So you got to do it through the town email. So it's going to bounce back. That's what's happened. Jason, I can send it to Mark directly, and I could have sent it to you individually, but not using the AC.
Yeah,
I just want to make sure I'm not missing emails. That's
John
all.
will get it. John will
I
get
got
it, and Judy will get it. But the other five, so I get it to you once we. Okay, let's do minutes. So we're going to only approve one set of minutes tonight, or hopefully is 1/6/21. So everybody should have a pretty good set of minutes to look at. I've got my revisions in, I will leave it to you guys to discuss whatever else you want to change on 1/6. And Andrew, do you want to take over?
Sure. Okay, on the 1/6/21 minutes, I actually had one proposed addition, which I wanted to mention, if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay, so at line 109 and 110, so this is about a comment that I made about where I'd asked the Council on Aging if there might be any turnbacks, right? I think I also mentioned in that same place, I would like it to say AD also raised for discussion purposes the possibility of hiring one full-time nurse for both COA and BOH needs.
You did. Claire, you got that?
Do you want me to say it again?
I do.
Okay, thanks.
You raised hiring one full-time nurse for both COA and for Board of Health, correct?
Yeah, and I raised for discussion purposes the possibility of having one FT nurse for both COA and BOH needs.
I have one quick question.
Yep.
The 1/6 minutes are not on the agenda. Can you still approve them tonight?
I noticed what I did. I meant to put 1/6 instead of 114, and I believe I'm well within doing the 1/6, unless somebody strongly objects. Okay, Jason. Okay, Jason say no.
It happens to all of us.
Jason says it's okay. It's okay. So no, I knew that, and good point, Claire. But I think we're okay. You know, this is not we're not debating, we're not voting. So I just can't imagine there's an issue with trying to approve the previous minutes instead of 114. All right. Anybody else have any changes to 1/6?
I had two potential. One I think is fairly straightforward. We talk about John Rooney leaving for recreation. I didn't see any mention of him coming back, but I'm pretty sure he did. So, John, did you come back for DPW?
Yeah, and I think it is related in a sentence, one sentence right before the next item.
Yeah, I think it's in there.
Yeah, it's at 150. It mentions he came back.
Oh, there you go. Sorry. Okay.
Thanks, John.
I missed that. So in the same section, I could go either way on this, but in and around 145, I was asking Tim about 9/11 Field, and he had submitted a memo which isn't listed in our document. So at least I would like that. You know, we need to reference those memos that they're updating, not just the budgets, like all those. But he said in his memo that 9/11 was self-funding, I believe, or we can look up the exact terms. But then he clarified that it's not this year, and there was an extensive conversation about that. I'm not sure that this, then we went into the conversation about like what they can do and not do with revenue. But I think it's really important that we had a document in front of us that unfortunately was wrong, and that everyone understands what the impact of that continues to do, because it will impact how we think about capital, right? It is $100,000 cost in this year's budget that we don't have any say in. That's $100,000 that can't be spent elsewhere if you're looking to fix to a certain rate potentially. So I think a sentence should be added in there related to that. And I think we definitely need to mention the memos that they're submitting as well, in addition to the budgets. This goes for all departments. So that's across the board.
And so I agree with the last part. The memo should be mentioned and attached. But now tell Claire exactly what sentence you want in there.
So I would take line after line at the end of line 146. I would just add, it was clarified that 9/11 Field is currently not self-sustaining. I could go on, but I think that accomplishes what I was looking to just kind of get in writing. Because if someone takes the memo that was submitted and then compares it to the discussion, I think it's inconsistent.
And just to be clear, not to change what you said, it's never self-sustaining. It's just more, it's worse right now because there's no fees. It never pays the full bond payment. They pull out, what they can.
Well, they did a much shorter bond than the life of the lease, I guess, right? Which is not our decision.
So that's right. There's no matching of the term of the lease to the bond. So what he said is fine, Claire. All I was just clarifying that it's never self-sustaining. It's just less self-sustaining now than ever.
Okay, so what I'll do is, if you guys tonight, Jason, before I send the finalized one to Andrew, I'll just shoot you what I corrected, just so that I have it.
Yeah, or literally just watch this tape whenever it gets posted.
Oh, there you
Take
go.
that
Okay.
sentence.
It's one sentence, Claire. It's one sentence. It's pretty easy.
The other thing is, going forward, if there's a lot of memos that get sent out, if I could be copied on them, it would really be helpful. Because they have to be.
Okay, I'll make sure you get each one for each meeting, but they're also supposed to be attached to ClearGov. They're not always. They're like the one that Barbara Sperry sent, which really was just details of the budget numbers. It wasn't a memo. That didn't get attached. So they're supposed to be attached, but sometimes people don't realize they're supposed to send them to Brian and us, and so they just send them to us, and I don't realize it's.
See, the problem is I don't have access to ClearGov.
Really?
I can, Claire, I can get these, the rec minutes.
We will get them to you. That's not your job. We will make sure you have them.
Okay. And Andrew P., thank you very much for sending the budget. It's much improved.
Yeah, I just sent you the latest one for today.
Is it even better?
No, it's the same report, but today's version versus last week's.
Oh, okay.
So Andrew, you're sending Claire the budgets for these departments for?
So I'm sending her a report that has the entire expenditure budget.
And what I have to do is
Claire, I think I would just attach the whole thing.
Oh, okay. That makes life easy.
So you can't go wrong. I mean,
It's 20 pages. It has the whole thing. And if we happen to talk about some budget, we're covered.
Yeah.
Okay.
More information than people
I'm
really
not sure
talked
it's
about.
really, I'm not sure it's really fair to somebody trying to figure something out, but it would cover it. Okay, we got 1 minute before we're ready for Mr. Butler. Anybody else have any changes to the January 6th minutes? Okay, someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes as amended tonight?
So moved.
Okay, second.
I second.
Okay, Judy seconded. Roll call, Judy.
Aye.
Cook, aye. Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Jason.
Aye.
Mr. Martell.
Aye.
Andrew P.
Aye.
Mr. Rooney.
Aye.
Okay, 7-0 for the 1-6 minutes. Okay, moving on. John, are you back? If you are, you're muted. Okay, so John,
Now, can you hear me?
now we can hear you.
All right. Is there an image associated with this? I only see my name.
Well, it depends on how you got into.
I can click start video here. Maybe that'll work.
There you are.
There you go.
There you are. Hello.
All right. So why don't you go ahead, Kathy? You're gonna...
I will introduce it, then turn it over to you. So long story short, everybody knows we've been talking about possible changes to the advisory bylaw, and we have spent quite a bit of time the last few meetings talking about the ability for the advisory committee members to be on another committee, standing and or ad hoc. Right now, we can be on one other ad hoc committee. So during that process, we've also discovered we have a problem today in that we've got 3 members of advisory currently on one other committee. We've got a quorum issue when the capital planning committee's work comes before advisory. So what we're going to talk to about tonight is not going to solve that. We're trying to talk about going forward. So we're still got to solve that one, which we will. So I'm going to turn this over to John because he's done a whole lot of work on this and he's got a nice PowerPoint to share with us.
Okay, so the background to this basically is the reason why I'm here is that Kathy remembered that the last amendment to the advisory bylaw took place at a time when I was on the committee, although it seems as though Al Hamilton drafted the last amendment, the one which restricts membership on other committees. But I was there, and Al and I have talked about it a little bit, so I'm going to talk to you about it. So I'm going to try to share screen here and see if this works.
Jason has to help you.
Let's try this.
Yeah, I gave him co-host when he said I have something to share. So there we go.
All right, so do you see some black and white slide material?
Do.
Yeah.
Okay, so the topic here is that standing committees are stipulated in the bylaw. They're created by bylaw or state statute. They can be either appointed or elected. The current bylaw prohibits advisory members from serving on standing committees. It may be that an exception is desirable for the capital planning committee if it should become a standing committee. So what are the considerations? What are the principles behind this, and what are the practices, and how could we possibly affect such a change? Basically, the principles are that there's a long tradition of legislative and executive separation. It goes back hundreds of years in this country. It's required by state law. Only the town meeting can raise taxes and appropriate funds. Only the executive can spend it. Today, we have three major components to the legislative function. All are mandated by the state law. The moderator, those are the moderator, the advisory committee, which can also be called the finance committee optionally, and town meeting. Those collectively make up the legislative part. The executive is very fragmented in town government. I'll list some of the main boards here. Voters, and I think this is the main point here, is that voters at town meeting depend upon the independence of the advisory committee for advice on taxation and appropriation. And they need that independence to be there. So that's the basic underlying principle, longstanding. What's a historic practice? Well, the beginning of the current text in the bylaw defining advisory committee dates back at least to the 1940s, and clearly contemplated it would be an independent function. It prohibited appointment of members who were on other committees. However, it did not, as we inherited it from the 1940s, prohibit members on the advisory committee from joining other committees. Only prevented it at the time of their appointment to advisory, but they couldn't be on other committees. So in the early 2000s, we had a problem on advisory committee, which is that members were joining other committees and then advocating for the budgets of those committees before advisory. And the members of those other committees expected their advisory member to, quote, get the budget through. That was when it sort of reached its worst characteristic, and we felt as though it needed to be fixed. Al picked up the task of drafting something. The bylaw was amended to reduce the problem by limiting participation in the other committees and prohibiting voting by such members in the advisory committee meeting on that topic. And it also signaled to the other committees that advisory was going to preserve its independence or its arm's length relationship, so that somebody couldn't come in and sort of present and use their position on advisory to sort of honcho a budget through. I also just note for reference that at that time, there was a capital budget committee that was on the legislative side, you might say, appointed by the moderator. For no particular reason, it never worked. It was just basically a membership and interest problem for the most part. But and eventually it was, after decades of not working, probably about 3 decades of not working, it was abolished in about 8 years ago. Okay, so what's happened recently? Well, you know, Board of Selectmen created an ad hoc committee, capital planning committee. The charter includes assisting with the review and evaluation of capital items and developing strategies to move these projects forward for approval. That's great from an executive side of the government's viewpoint. But it's exactly why advisory can't be, people who are on that committee are prohibited from voting for advisory's review of it, because if you're charged with getting it done, you're not looking at it independently with the kind of independence that the legislative side of the House requires. But some participation is a good idea. So how do you deal with this, right? And if it becomes a standing committee, that participation would be prohibited under the current bylaw. You couldn't stay on. So how to remedy it? Well, so now I'm going to make a recommendation to you because it seemed like the most succinct thing, and as I just witnessed, you guys have plenty of work to do. So maybe this will shorten it, and if it doesn't, well, you can do whatever you want with it. But I'm going to suggest what I think you should do, which is carve out an exception clause for a capital budget committee. And the reason I think it should be done that way, as opposed to writing something more broader, is that you have two other categories you could potentially include if you're going to amend the bylaw. You could include elected boards, which I think is wildly, would be very ill-advised. I mean, you just can't imagine someone sitting on advisory committee and also sitting on the school committee or also sitting on the board of selectmen. It just violates the whole principle on which the government is organized. And unfortunately, many appointed boards, the standing appointed boards, have large budgets, and membership on them, in my view, this is my opinion, would be undesirable. I have a list of them. There's no really good list of the town committees. I tried to find one, but I can go through some of them if you want. But they include lots of committees that are appointed, that are charged with spending money, recreation, all kinds of things, youth commission, everything. So I recommend that we carve out capital budget. It clearly is a sort of a committee that itself spans multiple departments' objectives, and so there's a reason for permitting participation. So I think we should carve that one out. And also there are some aspects of the bylaw language that could be standardized that have caused some problems, which I'll mention in a minute. A few side notes here. Now, I'm going to show you the language that I recommend for amending it in 1 minute here, but I want to make a few side notes. One thing is you have 3 members on one ad hoc committee right now. It's quite undesirable. This is the problem that Kathy mentioned a few minutes ago, which is that you're stuck. You can't get a quorum because those members under the current bylaw, as it's written, cannot participate for purposes of quorum. For elected boards under state law, where there is no quorum, there's something called the rule of necessity, but I did a little further research on that, and that law does not appear to cover appointed boards, which you are. So I don't think you have a way to vote for the advisory committee with the current membership and the current membership on capital planning to vote on any capital items as it stands right now. So, but that's not my current problem. But I wanted to note that I think that you really need to limit yourself to one in the future. The other thing I want to mention is that people have told me, as I've dug into this a little bit, how good the current capital planning committee is and what a good job it's doing. That's great. But you really can't write bylaws by thinking about what a wonderful job the current committee members are doing on any particular committee, because the opening text of this has been around since 1947. It could easily be around for 30 years or 40 years. Everyone will change. So you have to think about writing it so that it works kind of regardless of, through the thick and thin of committee quality and membership levels. So that's just 2 side things. Okay. So now here's what I would recommend to you as a way of solving the problem if the capital planning committee becomes a standing committee, and that is a carve out. So that right now it says, so I haven't read here the changes. This is section 9.8. It says no member shall be appointed who is a town officer, employee, or member of another town committee, appointed or elected. That is the 1947 text, provided, however, that an advisory committee member may be appointed to, and here I'm going to enumerate 3, whereas previously there were 2, I'm going to add 1. So with the adding 1, I'm going to enumerate or letter them here. A, 1 ad hoc committee that is appointed by an elected board or official, 1 other committee appointed by the moderator, or 1 committee chartered to consider capital appropriations with under the following restrictions. Now, these restrictions I've just edited a little bit, and I'll tell you why, because of a confusion that arose that Kathy brought to my attention when she first dropped this problem on me. The restrictions are the advisory member's appointment must be approved in advance by a majority vote of the advisory committee, excluding the member desiring to participate in the above committees. That language is substantially there, but we're just switching it to focusing on the appointments here. B, the advisory member must recuse themselves during advisory meetings when matters subject to the consideration by the above other committees are considered by the advisory committee. Okay, so previously Al had the text in here, may not vote or be counted for purposes of quorum. This was kind of some language that's in the bylaw now that is, you might say, crafted to approximate recusal, but I'm suggesting that what happened when this first came up is Kathy went to the town clerk and said, why does it say counted for purpose? Why does it have this language in here about counted for purposes of quorum? Jim Hagerty said, gee, that's weird. I'm paraphrasing, maybe Kathy will correct it, but some puzzling over this language. But on the other hand, because the state conflict of interest law makes frequent use of the notion of recusal, which captures not voting and not counting its purposes of a quorum, and also can only participate in the discussion as if a member of the public. So those are the 3 characteristics of recusal, but recusal is a well understood concept. And so rather than listing these things out here that approximate recusal, I think you should just use the commonly used language, which is recusal. So that's my suggestion for how you amend this. Now, I do have a list of other committees so here is the text with the markup. Here's the clean version. There's one little error, which is the word "to" was struck in the slide that I showed you, but
I can't see it anymore.
Is anyone else's screen gray?
Oh, okay. We lost it here. Okay. Let me see if I can fix that.
It's back.
Yeah, okay. So the word "to" should not be struck in the very last B. Maybe I should pause here and see what questions you have.
Hey, John Rooney, thank you. On paragraph A, because there are 3 members of advisory that would be seeking a position on the capital committee, would all 3 members be prohibited from voting? And then it would just be the majority of the remaining advisory members?
So the only problem you have in what you just said, John, is the would be. That's the state case now. This text without the red is there today. So those 3 members who are on capital cannot vote nor count for quorum when advisory considers any capital items in the next 2 months. That's the law right now.
Well, my question is, can they vote as to their ability to participate in the capital committee? Maybe I'm not saying it clearly.
Well, that would be A. I'm assuming that sometime in the past, 3 people said, hey, I want to be on capital. And the advisory committee voted to approve that because that's the only way they could actually be on there. Is that the case?
Excluding the 3 people who wanted to be on capital, correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's the way it would have had to be done, to be legally done.
Kathy, I don't remember that. Did that happen?
But John, I think to your point, you would vote on.
It happened for Andrew and I, and then Jason came on. He was already on capital planning, so he came the other way, and we did vote to allow him to continue to be on capital planning. So yes, long answer to your question, we did vote properly for all 3 people to be.
Okay.
But John, I think to your point, you would vote each person independently, right?
Right.
So it'd be like, I vote Jason, Jason wouldn't vote, right? And then Jason could vote for me or Kathy, you know what I mean?
No, I thought that all three of them could not vote on any of them, Andrew.
Because they can't vote, they can't, if I read this correctly,
Go ahead, Andrew.
excluding the member desiring to participate. So you're voting on, say, Jason. Jason just can't vote because he's the member looking to participate. Not that those people are already participating and then therefore are excluded from voting.
I agree with that interpretation, Andrew.
Okay.
So you could have had a circular, a sort of circular approval with one person not being able to vote, which is specifically when their name is coming up for consideration to being on the committee. But now that three people are on the committee, you may, depending on the membership in the committee, on advisory committee, you may have a quorum problem that you can't solve with all three of those people there.
Which is the number B, which is the letter B. Yeah.
So can I ask a question on that point just before we move off of it? John, I think that the situation Kathy outlined may be, I know what you're trying to do within advance, and I actually don't have an issue with that, but it doesn't address the flip side of how, like, for example, I got appointed to advisory after I was on capital planning. There's no way for advisory to approve me in advance because I was
That's
already
right.
on.
You should, but as far as I can see, you were not admissible to be appointed to advisory when you were on another committee. That's just straight up language that's the 1947 text that's still there. You were not eligible to be appointed to advisory if you were then a member of another committee.
That's still there.
Well, but it was still an ad hoc committee, right?
It's still ad hoc.
It
Doesn't
matter.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It says no member shall be appointed who is a member of another town committee. If you were a member of Capital when you were appointed to advisory, it was in violation of the bylaw.
He was.
Yeah, I'm not dealing with any of that. That's been around since 1947. I'm just trying to make it possible for, if this thing switches to standing with the least other disturbance to the existing bylaw as possible, and with a little bit of clarification of the existing bylaw to make it possible for a member of advisory to be a member of one standing committee, namely one that is chartered to consider capital appropriations.
I think you need to, I guess what I would advocate for is, I don't know that there's any pre-prescribed order to how you should be appointed, right? Like, I don't think we should tie the moderator's hands of who he or she wants to appoint in the future. Like, can you make it like,
we're not doing that now. That would require an undoing, if you wanted to do that, of the opening text, which is basically been around for, we can do that, we can change that, but that was not proposed. That's not been a topic yet. The only topic right now has been the problem was presented to me was we want to be able to have people who are on advisory join the capital planning committee. It was, if you want to say, let's allow the moderator to appoint people who are on other committees, that's just a different problem.
Yeah, so Jason, I think it's just more of a semantics thing. I mean, technically you should have resigned, then been reappointed. Right?
Yeah.
To be compliant with the bylaw, that is right. That's what would have had to have happened. Or the moderator could have said, if you want to stay in that committee, I can't appoint you. That would have been the proper thing, but that's not really what's before us right now. That's under the bridge.
Right. So let's go to B again. When you say recuse, I didn't realize that recuse in the legal world means also you actually are recused as far as quorum goes too. So
yes.
Okay. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that still, you're not going to be counted for the quorum if you're recusing. So no matter what, I think one of the lessons we're going to learn from this is we never should put three people on one committee going forward.
I think that's correct.
Kathy, the other question is, are presented, it's consideration by the committee, right? when matters are subject to their jurisdiction, right? Is capital presenting anything? I mean, if Karen needs a hook lift truck, it's Karen's item, right? Not capital's. So would that be a conflict? I don't know.
Well,
It's still capital too, and maybe it's both, but it's definitely capital.
But it's not capital's not presenting it on behalf of capital's budget. It's part of DPW's.
Yeah, I think you're splitting that.
That's not true. That's not true. We remember with Karen, we did not have her present anything capital because we said
Yeah.
we are doing that with the capital planning committee. We're looking at the entire capital plan at one time, and we're not talking specifically to departments about their piece of that.
Well, but I mean, like that hook lift truck isn't for the rec. It's allocated. It's dedicated. That asset would go under her.
Yeah, but Andrew, if you just look at the spirit of what this is trying to do, you've got an advisory member who is on capital planning, who absolutely weighed in on that, decided what they wanted to do, and is in front of advisory talking about their vote, what they decided they wanted to have happen. So they are advocating in part for what they decided in that other committee.
and furthermore, the charter of the capital planning committee, as currently stipulated, is to get it done, implement, get this capital stuff moving forward. The advisory committee must stand back and decide whether things have merit independently of the executive. That's the basic structure we've got here.
The way we have it set up now, John, is that we, as advisory, cannot vote on any capital items that come before us because we will not have a quorum.
Well, that's a problem that's true, but that's because, as Kathy said, you shouldn't have put 3 people on there.
Yep.
Or you need 9 members. I don't know whether you could swing it. Let's see, 3, if you had all 9
It'd be
members.
fine.
What?
Well, if we made 7 members, would be fine too.
We've got 7 members. Well,
Current
but
draft that's
we're
on the
not,
screen
we're not changing this for the current year. I mean, this is for next year. So as far as solving it this
Kathy?
year, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
John, on your red line, it doesn't change the total size of the board. We had committee. We had talked about reducing the size of the advisory committee from 9 to 7. Do you?
Yeah, I wasn't asked to do that.
Are you
So,
generally?
I'm not opposed.
supportive
I
of
don't
that
have
idea?
any, it just wasn't in something I was asked to do. So it's fairly easy to change that. That's not a complicated drafting question. Just change it. But
I thought we were past that, Andrew. So John just focused on this part. So, but hear what he said. He doesn't oppose going from 9 to 7.
Okay, good.
So,
yeah,
Kathy, if I can just add 2 things. One, I'm not sure that the charge that exists now for the capital planning committee is what ultimately, at least my personal opinion, would come through to town meeting as a standing committee. Because what I have seen the committee as currently constructed do, and John, I appreciate not forming a committee, not forming language around current membership, but thinking longer term, is capital planning is really acting as capital advisory in many ways, because there were projects that came before from department heads that we voted no on. And all we did was we said, Board of Selectmen, FYI, this project shouldn't, this is not, like, for example, the transfer station. If we had just taken what was in the capital plan, the capital planning inherited when it was informed, and did no research and didn't engage with you on your work, right? We would have presented a $3 million capital item to this year's town meeting. But we did the homework to advise on an answer that was really to provide a recommendation to the town that this isn't a good use of capital funds.
So the issue, there are 2 issues here. One, if you wanted to transmute the capital planning function into, let's say, an advisory, legislative side advisory committee, there would be 2 things that would be required. One would be changing the charter to get rid of language about advancing, getting projects moved forward for approval. And secondly, it would have to be appointed by the moderator. You can't have a Board of Selectmen appointed committee that is considered part of the legislature. It doesn't fly. That's why you guys are appointed by the moderator.
Yeah, in particular, I understand why that language is, but we're not moving projects. That's not really what we're doing, right?
I think
now.
I think if you have two characteristics there, one is this is me speaking, but I think my opinion would be if you have two characteristics there. One is a perfectly reasonable charter description from the Board of Selectmen's viewpoint. Let's figure out what we need to do and get it done. That's what this says. And appointment by the Board of Selectmen, those two characteristics are both inadmissible for a legislative side function that needs to be able to stand before a town meeting and say, we've looked at everything, and here's where we agree with the Board of Selectmen, here's where we don't agree with them. You can't have appointed by Board of Selectmen and have a charter like this, both of which are perfectly reasonable from a management viewpoint, but don't fit with the legislative side. You need to create that independence. That's my opinion. And the old committee, the old capital planning committee that didn't work, was a moderator appointed committee.
So I think that's a discussion with the moderator in the Board of Selectmen. But I think someone needs to outline if what capital planning is doing now is what the town wants going forward. We're 10 months in, right? Like the other way to deal with it is it continues as an ad hoc, for another year till you really figure out what capital planning is doing. You still have to make some of these wording changes, but it may make it cleaner because, then I think what you've done is simplified the conversation. But I don't think that just, let's just say there weren't three of us on it now. I still think it's a little bit of an issue because let's just say there was only one of us on right now. If you go back to your next slide, I think the question on recuse, like when I think of recuse, like if I were that one member and I was on, I would literally step out of the room, like regardless of whether it's in person or on the Zoom, and go into the audience, right? Like you said. And I don't think there's any, I don't want to stay on screen, any of that. But how, for example, I'm currently the chair of that committee. So I would have to basically delegate to another member of capital planning, if I were that one member as an example, right? To then make a presentation to advisory on what everyone did, right?
So that's just the rule currently. Right now, you can't count as quorum. And
I understand that.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the future.
Well, so I should say that I think the charter of the Capital Planning Committee is a good one. And I think it's good for the Board of Selectmen to have gotten this thing going and for you to be doing the work, for the committee to be doing the work that it's doing. I'm not sure that if I were sitting in the Board of Selectmen, or even, I don't think I'd recommend to the Board of Selectmen that it be moved to a moderator appointed thing. It seems to be working. They are interested in it. Great. But on the other hand, we have the rule now, which is that which currently, unfortunately, is three of you can't vote or be counted for a quorum on advisory committee because historical problems, which we've seen, and which I pretty much guarantee, if you were to remove the language that was added in 2008 or whatever it was, you'll go back to having those problems again of conflict.
And I don't want those. I completely agree with that.
So I guess I would say that, if you guys and the moderator and the Board of Selectmen agreed, let's put it back the way it was with the moderator appointed committee, then, by the way, though, the way we always did it, now the Capital Planning Committee was ineffective. It was called the Capital Budget Committee, but the Capital Budget Committee, some years it never met. There were all kinds of problems. It didn't really work. But the way we did it then was we had a liaison, but not a member. Okay, so the person from advisory was a liaison to the Capital Budget Committee, sat in on the meetings as a point, as their purpose, but did not vote with the Capital Budget Committee. We never used this post-2008 language to put a member on the capital budget committee. Rather, we just had a liaison. And that was even when it was moderator appointed. Generally, the sense was at the time that really town meeting didn't mind hearing from two independent voices, although frankly, it's so rare the capital budget did its job that they often didn't show up. But the point is that we just were liaisons. If you wanted to go back to that, if you wanted to go back to a moderator appointed committee, then it's creates a somewhat different situation. I personally wouldn't recommend it. Things working. It's working nicely now. I think the Board of Selectmen is more interested in it, and that's a good thing. But you got to figure out how you want to handle it. And I think it's essential. And I'm glad to hear that you agree. That I think it's essential that town meeting knows advisory committee is there as an independent voice.
And I agree, and that's by far, to me, the most important thing, to make sure.
And I'll tell you, we used to have, rec would show up and somebody who was an advisory was on the rec commission and they would say, well, no, he's going to present the budget. I mean, it was ridiculous. And that was what triggered our action.
Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense. And I just think as a non-starter. I do think, Kathy, we should explore that ex officio type role that John, I think it was referring to liaison, because I think that these committees have to be linked at the hip in terms of understanding what each is doing, right? Because it comes together in one picture, but I then think there's a very distinct advocacy / independence issue after that.
Let me see if I can share screen again here and just show you one other thing here a minute. So there is the town website purports to have a list of committees, but it doesn't really, because the bylaw has other committees that are that the town doesn't even show in its website. They're established in the bylaw, but no one has staffed them in 20 years. But let's just look at this here for a minute. The grayed out committee names, this is a list of committee names, and it's not segregated by ad hoc or standing, but many of them are standing. The elected boards are grayed out. I don't think anyone can imagine having shared positions between advisory and the elected boards. But look at the yellow ones. I highlighted in yellow ones which have significant budgetary roles. And, I don't think you want to open up many of which are standing committees. CPC, for example, standing committee, Conservation Commission, standing committee, Council on Aging, EDC, Rec.
They're all standing.
Those are all standing. You don't want to open up those to joint membership. It's just going to cause problems for yourselves. So that's why I went the route of a carve out for one that I think does merit special consideration, which is why I drafted it the way I suggested.
Now, John, in researching other towns that have similar bylaws, I did find a couple interesting ones. Holland allows the advisory committee members to serve on a committee that does not have a budget. Rowley is a budget under 1,000.
That's equivalent of not having a budget in a $50 million world.
Yeah, but that would be like to pay for a minute taker or something like that, which is an interesting thought, is to say either no budget or budget under 2,500 or something, which kind of helps with what you're talking about, but maybe gives advisory members to kind of serve in some other capacity.
Well, and if you look at historically what we have done, if you look at where advisory has been on other committees, it has been that type of stuff. We've been on the road, and they've been temporary committees, the road committee, the town manager committee, public safety committee. That may have been a standing committee, but it was still going to be temporary. So maybe that's a little bit, that one certainly had it.
Kathy, although they don't have a budget, they're making recommendations which impact the overall town budget.
Right. So I still would say that, as far as framing this, advisory has got to weigh in on the capital budget. I mean, you can't go to town meeting and say, well, we didn't look at that because we couldn't. You can't do that. It's too big part of the budget. So we cannot end up with a structure after we solve this year's problem where advisory doesn't have a robust ability to look at the capital budget committee. And for example, this year, I've got some things that I probably will not support that did get approved in the capital planning committee because the budget problems are too big to still support those. So I want the ability to be able to weigh in, and I can't unless I resign, which is probably what's going to have to happen. So we just can't get to the point ever again that we can't weigh in as advisory on the capital budget committee. It's too much. It's too important part of the budget. So that can't happen again. So we know that. So I think the question really is, do we want to carve out the capital planning committee like John's done in his proposal, or do we not? It's kind of limited to that. And then if we do, then we need to make sure we never put more than one person or approve one person being on that committee again.
No, the other possibility would be, I don't know what the intention, I mean, why does it, so if the Board of Selectmen did not make it a standing committee, then the need to amend the bylaw goes away. And you can live with the current language if you had to. If they are determined to make it a standing committee, well then, you're going to have to do something if you want to stay on.
They're not determined. It's just they happen to like this committee a lot, so that's all there's to it. They like it, and so why not make it a standing committee? They haven't given it any great thought as far as standing versus ad hoc. But even if they keep it ad hoc, we still cannot have three advisory members on it.
You can't have three members on it. That just doesn't work.
Kathy?
Yes.
Could I make a comment? And it might be helpful to look at the draft that John had, to put that back on the screen to explain.
Sure, I can put it back on. Yeah.
Okay. First off, thank you very much for doing this.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to do it.
It's very helpful. I like the draft that John has, just considering the comments that we've heard.
Can you see it now? I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I like this, but I would just suggest on B, where you wanted to strike may not vote or be counted for purposes of quorum, to make that, to say must recuse. My concern about that is how I interpret recuse means not only that you can't vote, and I think you're right, if you recuse, you're not counted for purposes of quorum, but also that you have no, just as you have no role in the discussion, just like James.
I've just walked through this heavily in preparation for this. There are three requirements when you're recused. You have to leave the front table. Okay, I mean that's for physical, but there are three sort of logical requirements. You can't vote, you can't count as a quorum, and you cannot participate in discussion as a member. That's the equivalent of leaving the front table. You may participate, and so you can leave, just walk out of the meeting. Or you may participate on a status the same as members of the public. Okay, so those are the rules for recusal. Right now, you've got two of those in here specified, but not the how the person may participate is not in the current language. Okay, in other words, theoretically, under B as it's currently written here, theoretically the person could remain at the front table and participate as if they were a member, even though they're not able to vote or count as a quorum. That's a peculiar animal that doesn't exist anywhere else, that was written by Al. Okay.
Well, here's where I was going with this.
Yeah, sir. Just wanted to clarify those things. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think even though it looks like it was written under unusual circumstances, it actually, as I think about it, makes sense to me because, so practically thinking, if we reduce the size of the advisory committee from 9 to 7, so then our quorum is 4, right? And then we discontinue the practice of, for the beginning, going forward of having 3 advisory members on capital committee, so that no more than 2, right? So then there would be 5 people who would discuss whether to support at town meeting recommendations of the capital planning committee. The other 2 who might be members wouldn't vote, but I think it is important for us. For example, let's say Kathy was still on both and she didn't vote. I still would have a lot of questions for her about why do you think this is a good idea? Was thought given to that? And I do think that recusal, I've always thought where I recuse, I would never recuse and then say, oh, I'm going to leave the dais, but then go to the podium and ask a question as a member of the public. You know, it's totally, whatever question you have is totally tainted by the reason why you recuse yourself. So bottom line, as I think about it, I actually I think I am supportive of just keeping it the advisory member may not vote or be counted, because then they at least could participate in the discussion, but they wouldn't ultimately.
I don't have any strong, I don't have very strong feelings about that, except that the language, I know Kathy and the town clerk went around trying to figure out why in the world, what this meant and why it was there. I think that wouldn't have happened with recusal. I would also just point out that in this conversation, could be recused. That is, I'm participating as a member of the public here tonight. But on the other hand, if you want to leave it alone, I don't feel strongly about it one way or the other. I just thought, given when Kathy first approached me, she said she and Jim Haggerty had been noodling over what in the world does this language mean? And I think, you know, it would have, if Al had written recuse at the beginning, it wouldn't have been a question as to what the language meant. But be that as it may, if you like it this way, I don't care.
But, you know, go back to what Jason said. I'm not sure this actually, everybody heard Jason. Jason's the chair of that committee. So Jason, when advisory was listening to the capital planning committee's presentation, Jason couldn't be there for that either as chair of that committee. He's got to recuse himself. So he would be in the audience listening to his committee that he's chair of, having to do what he normally is used to doing. So it would really hamstring him as far as what he normally would do, like what he did when he presented in front of the Board of Selectmen. He wouldn't be able to do that in front of advisory.
I think it's fair to say that when the 9.8 in its current form was approved in 2008, it was not really contemplated that an advisory member would become chairperson in their role of another important committee in their role as a member of that other committee. It's just that degree of involvement was considered more or less as a formalization of liaison rather than, you know, something where the person is also running this other committee.
And John, we're still doing the liaisons just like you were used to when you were on advisory. That hasn't changed. So we still have liaisons to the big ones.
John, as a hypothetical, right? So right now we have 3 members. If Kathy and I were liaisons to the capital planning committee and Jason came in to do his presentation, so he would recuse himself from the front table and he would be, you know, presenting just like any department head would.
Right.
And then Kathy and I can talk about the discussion as the liaisons and we can vote and we can be acting as forum. I think.
Yes, that's
Kathy,
correct.
that's
If you were not voting members of the capital planning committee, that's correct.
Correct. We're not voting members of capital planning committee, but liaisons.
Right.
And then Jason would be the only one that couldn't vote because he's, you know, on the actual capital.
That's correct.
All right, so you're saying Jason could present it this way, because it does say
he could present just as just as the chief comes in and presents on the the DPW budget. You know?
So I think we all need to be aware, right? If we're using us, I think we need to be careful, right? Go back to John's thing is we're talking about current members, right? I may not be chair of capital planning next year, right? Like it's a 1-year term right now. Board of Selectmen may choose not to reappoint me, right? They may not, right? So, but I think if you want to use that as a hypothetical, I do think, say this in practice from the public safety building, John Wood was on advisory at first, Kathy, right? He was still on advisory, and he was ex officio to public safety buildings. So he couldn't vote, but he was there, I believe, every step of the way. So that, like, then when advisory had to take a vote before, town meeting, right, when we went for the special, I think there was pretty good segregation there, that he was able to bring links and updates, but had never taken a formal stance, and was able to provide, I believe, an
He
independent
didn't
view.
vote. He didn't vote at advisory. I agree.
Yeah. So, but I think this also goes to how do you craft the language on a standing committee. So, I mean, I just wanted to echo, the appreciation for John's work. It's definitely given me a lot to think about, but I think we also need to figure out exactly what problems we want to solve for without making it too complicated, right? Because the more complicated we get, the harder it's going to be, to pass, and then you jeopardize some of the other, what I'll call easier things that we've already agreed to.
So I just would point out that in choosing let's carve out, we got a problem with one committee potentially. Let's do a carve out approach for that. That was an effort not to potentially explode a conversation into a lot of tangential areas, like, why would you want to have someone on the Conservation Commission or any of the other commissions that have substantial standing charters and budgets? Let's minimize the trouble that we bite off here by just focusing on the one thing, which has a peculiarly intimate relationship to the budgets you need to recommend on. Well,
but to reiterate, we don't have to do anything. We can explain to the Board of Selectmen why we think they should not make capital planning standing because of what it does to the people on it. Leave it as one ad hoc. We've learned our lesson. Don't approve more than one going forward. Solve our problem for this year by probably two people. Actually, only need one to resign. So one person resigns so that we can vote on the capital budget and then go forward and just know that we've learned our lesson and never put multiple members on a committee without formally changing the bylaw. So that's one way to do it. That's the least work.
Kathy?
Yes.
So, I mean, just tying this all together, I think that I just keep coming back to, I like the idea, and the more I think about it, I think John's proposal here of having this carve out is good. Right, by having the carve out specifically for the capital planning committee, doesn't matter whether the capital planning committee is standing or ad hoc. As long as these conditions are met, then you can be on both committees, right? And I still think that, and it's not like John was indifferent about it on B, just keep the language it was, that advisory committee that is on the capital planning committee and got the proper approvals in advance would just not vote or be counted for purposes of a quorum during our meeting, but otherwise could participate in the discussion, obviously would be encouraged to participate in the discussion. You just wouldn't ultimately vote on it. And, since the idea of our having like a carve out meeting just to consider this is to start to advance it, does it make sense to maybe make a motion to actually put this to a vote?
So, Andrew, if I might, I'm fine with you are leaving the may not be voted, or instead of for dropping the recuse proposal. I don't care. You want to get rid of that? That's fine. There's one other little change here, which is the words "the jurisdiction of," and people have raised a question about, and I substituted the words here "consideration by" as opposed to subject to the subject to consideration by instead of subject to the jurisdiction of. The words jurisdiction of seem to a few people to be too tight. That is, jurisdiction, suggests strict control at the very least, and that's not what this never was the right language, So
I agree. I like your change.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to point out that there are two things in B, okay? And if you want to if you want to go back to the Al Hamilton language, I'm fine. I don't care. But I would suggest use consideration rather than jurisdiction, because jurisdiction just never was right.
Does it make sense? And I think this is what Jason was suggesting, that we deal with the current problem we now have by having two members resign from capital planning. Then at some point in the future, we deal with the amendment to this bylaw. I think that's the cleanest way to do it. We don't link it to the problem that we have, but we just solve the problem that we have. And then moving forward, we revise 9.
Well, but it depends, John, on when the Board of Selectmen choose to instantiate the capital planning committee as a standing committee. If they go to town meeting with a proposal that it go into that capital planning, go into the bylaw, then you're going to be thrown off of it completely unless you do something, or you want to just do a liaison approach, But if you want to have a member on that committee and they switch it to standing, you got to have something like this.
Yeah. So it'd have to be coordinated.
Yeah, maybe they're not going to do it. I don't know. It came to me. Kathy came to me and said they're going to make it standing. What do we do? So I wrote something.
So it's a placeholder. Capital planning is scheduled to talk about it on Monday, but I think to get this thing coordinated I think we advance down the path that they are going to make it standing, because I think that's the more difficult situation, right? And I will reach out and have the Board of Selectmen specifically discuss whether they plan to advance this at this town meeting, especially because I think they need to call the ball because they're the sponsor of the article. If they're going to advance it, make it stand, we know what we have to do, right? Both short term and long term. If they say it's going to be ad hoc, then the question is, how much do you feel like you need to amend for the long term until they come back to say, we want to make it standing?
Yeah, honestly, I think if you don't have this problem because they're going to leave it as ad hoc, I don't think I'd go messing around with this paragraph just for yucks. Just let it go.
I agree with that, because you just open up a lot of can of worms with questions. But I still think we should go from 9 to 7, no matter what.
Yeah, but if we're under the hood doing that, do we just try to do this at the same time?
Well, you could. By the way, has anyone checked state statute on numbers of members of a finance committee? Because I haven't.
I've seen 7s. I think I've seen 5s actually.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I'm not surprised. I just thought somebody ought to look.
Kathy?
Yeah.
I'm still not following how the discussion about how our taking a vote on this proposed bylaw amendment is affected, or why we should delay it for a discussion by the Board of Selectmen about whether capital planning is ad hoc or standing, because there's the proposal here, there's a specific carve out saying that an advisory committee member can be on the capital planning committee regardless of whether it's standing or ad hoc. And I just think that, this is something that's been on our agenda. This is like the 4th or the 5th time. And I just would like to do something to make progress on it. And we just lose momentum if we carry it over to a next meeting. Does what I say make sense? Or
so you're right.
Why should we delay acting on this tonight?
You're right. If we approved what John's recommended in the clean version, it really wouldn't matter what Board of Selectmen did. They've got a choice. They could make it or not. And we've got it covered either way. So you're right.
So I'm thinking about making a motion here, if you think it makes sense. Is it premature?
I do. I do.
Okay, so the two things that I would suggest changing to this would be, 9 becomes 7. And then, John, are you doing it so it'll show in red line?
I'll do it here.
Thank you.
Then in his clean version, we'll
And then just on B, you would, reject the change that you have in red line and just go back to may not vote or be considered. For
Hang
vote.
on a minute.
Yep.
This is the way you mean to have it, Andrew.
Yes.
This is your motion.
And Kathy,
Okay.
is the motion that the advisory committee is going to sponsor this? We're going to sponsor the warrant article, or that?
Board of Selectmen's going to. This is
Okay.
what we're recommending to them. So
All right.
they've got to say yes to this too. Because that's the
So,
plan. That's the plan.
yes.
That's the plan. I just thought it looked better for them to sponsor it rather than we sponsor our own change.
Okay. So I move that the advisory committee recommend that the Board of Selectmen sponsor a warrant article revising the advisory committee bylaw in the form that's presented on the screen by Mr. Butler.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, let's vote. Judy,
Aye.
Cook, aye. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Mr. Martell,
Aye.
Andrew Pfaff. Is that an aye?
Yep.
Okay, we didn't hear you. Mr. Mooney?
Aye.
All right, 7-0. We are a
And
very close
John,
to-
could you email a copy of that
Yes,
document? to
so
one of us?
here's what I'll do. The clean version is not quite cleaned up. I'll clean that up, and I'll send this document with the markup and the clean to Kathy, if that's sufficient for you guys.
It is.
Okay,
John.
good night,
Thank-
folks.
Thank you, John.
What about on the Board of Health, making progress to have them like licensed trash haulers? Do you know if there's anything that's happened on that further?
Well, I don't know anything formally. Sam Stivers had said to me that they were going to do it about maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago. He sent me a note saying, hey, they're going to do it. I didn't follow. I thought, great. I said to Sam, well, that's good. I think it's
Okay, he just says they are doing this for 2020.
Yeah.
he said that to me,
Well, he said
but
it
I
just now.
haven't double checked, minutes. or
Mary Lou
anything.
said it was on their radar earlier tonight.
So Mary Lou said so tonight, John.
Okay.
Yeah.
Health.
Yeah.
Sam just sent us a message and said they're doing
I mean, Sam asked me in the course of talking with the Board of Health, asked me how often they should collect the data. And I said, I thought we should do it quarterly, because if we do it annually, it'll be too long before we know if we're got some problem in our data collection process. So do it quarterly, and then we'll be able to fix anything if it's broken before it's too late. That was it.
All right, so we got it done.
All right, Kathy, so you'll get this from me probably tomorrow. See you.
Thank you as always.
Good night, everybody.
All right, bye-bye. All right. Moving on. Jason, how wedded are you to doing the vacation and sick pay tonight? How long will it take?
It's all about how many questions people have. It will take me 10 minutes to walk through it.
Well, that's all we've got left that's substantive. I'm not going to talk anymore about the budget. Nothing's really changed a lot last time, other than Asabat, which was updated on what I sent to you today and what I put into OneDrive. So everybody got the bandwidth to do one more thing?
Sure.
Okay, all right, let's do it. Okay, Jason.
All right. So this is the finalization of the discussion we've had many times now about which started with what I'll call 2 very straightforward questions. 1, which town employees received a payout on vacation time at the end of FY20? And 2, what happened to our accrued vacation accrual? for basically money we would owe to employees if they were to, leave employment with the town, based on the fact that obviously no one was taking vacations from March on, right? For the most part. And two, there were certain departments, in particular fire, that chose to suspend vacation, which they're contractually, the chief has the ability to do contractually in abnormal situations. What I thought was just going to be a simple answer obviously has turned into a process, but what I want to do is update everyone on kind of the findings. And obviously we can discuss or answer questions tonight, or, Kathy, if you're willing to carry to a future meeting, depending on timing, where you want to go. So I'm going to...
Jason, can I just interrupt for one moment?
Sure.
Given that we're going to be talking about a policy that may apply to town employees, I think it's probably cleanest if I step away from this, Kathy.
Okay.
I don't want to be involved in any discussion relative to personnel time, vacation time, payback, et cetera. So in an effort to be consistent and transparent, I think I'm going to recuse myself. And as Andrew D said, I'm going to remove myself from the hearing.
Okay. So Jason will put you out to the audience.
Thank you, Jason. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fair. Thank you for stopping me. Okay, so let's start with payouts first. There are 4 contracted department heads with contracts that are entitled to be paid out for 1 week of unused vacation time. Town administrator, fire chief, police chief, and treasurer. Last year, the town administrator and the police chief opted to take advantage of that. The fire chief was eligible to and had the amount of vacation in his bank to get a payout, but chose not to do it because it was going to put him over budget. You'll recall the Board of Selectmen budget did come before us as a interdepartmental transfer for postage. These vacation payouts have never been budgeted before, so arguably the town administrator's payout put the Board of Selectmen budget over as well. I'll leave that one there. The treasurer has indicated to me that he's never used it and currently does not have any intention of using it, although he is clearly contractually obligated to it. In addition, the fire union that does have a clause for vacation payout in the event of a suspension of vacation by the chief, did receive a payout of over $50,000 for both vacation and personal time. Vacation is clearly allowed by the contract. Personal time is silent. There's no provision in the contract that allows for personal time to be paid out. So in terms of remedies, obviously these are, I think everything I've just stated right now is factual. You'll notice in the budget for this year, the town administrator and police chief are budgeting for FY22 to have a vacation time buyout at the end of each year. The fire chief is not budgeting it. The treasurer is not budgeting it. So I do think, while I don't necessarily agree that that's a good contractual provision, we don't control contracts. We've talked about that a lot tonight. What I do think is good policy, though, is if we expect to expend the money, it should be budgeted. So that's in the budgets. The town administrator's contract, as we did talk about last week, does expire in the middle of the next fiscal year. So obviously that assumes that that provision survives the next negotiation. The fire union, that's hopefully a one-time item. I guess the concern there is there's never anything in writing with the collective bargaining unit. There's no deliberation in executive session amongst Board of Selectmen. And in particular, you hopefully have not set precedent moving forward.
Okay, so Jason, just to be clear with the personal time for the union employees, they don't have that in their contract that they get paid out if they forfeit or can't take the personal days. That's a true statement?
Yes.
But they did get it paid?
Yes. And I just think a decision of that magnitude, to have seen no discussion about it, and no consultation is just bad government, bad transparency. Because while I don't think the analysis was flawed, I didn't look at it. It doesn't make sense to go back and look at it. What's done is done. But what I think advisory needs to weigh in on is what should have been done in the future, right? And even though it didn't cause a reserve fund transfer, I think collaboration is always key. I wasn't on advisory when obviously this decision was made, but obviously your committee didn't talk about it, Board of Selectmen didn't talk about it. And I just think consultation and discussion about those items of that magnitude just should happen in the future. It was abnormal. I'm not disagreeing with what happened per se, but it was a big number.
Okay, but hold on. Advisory didn't know what you just said. Advisory was told, go back to the Board of Selectmen, they're overage. We were told it was postage.
That's not true. They were over on postage too, but there were payouts that came out there too. So I think when we come, when we look at reserve fund transfers this year, or even line item transfers, I'm going to want to see the whole budget for a department, not just one individual line item that they've selected for discussion.
And then on the union payouts that are not in the contract that were done anyway, those departments weren't over. So we didn't deal with anything as far as that goes.
Correct. But I think there should have been a conversation with whoever the fire liaison was last year, at the bare minimum, and town administrator and Board of Selectmen as the appointing authority of that department.
I'll let Chelsea know.
Do you think it was inadvertent that this was done? That
no, there was a lot of analysis done, but we all know, right? With all due respect to all parties involved, sometimes an independent way of looking at it. Because remember, you could have let those union individuals carry it over into this year. Fire doesn't backfill shifts until they're down more than 2 people on a shift. So this may not have actually, maybe shouldn't have cost the town what it did. I don't know. It's all hindsight is 2020 at this point. But at least if someone had weighed in that was independent to the process, I don't know if the answer would have changed or not, but I think there would have been a little more, rigor around the process.
And you're not aware of any discussion among anyone about this. It just got done. Someone
Yes.
had to have signed off on this.
Went through payroll. Department head sends payroll in, and they did it.
Okay.
Any questions on payouts before I'm going to transition here?
Well, Jason, just a quick question. Thank you for doing. Is the problem you're describing? Do you think this is something that's like a one-time thing that happened due to COVID, or is it something that may have been going on before also, and we just were not paying attention to it?
I think it's one time on the fire payouts in particular. I think that's a one time. But I mean, I'm hoping it stays healthy, but I'm not aware of any other situations forthcoming this year. But the department head issue is contractual. So that's with us and with and until a contract either expires or is amended.
That certain department heads have contracts to say if I don't use vacation time in a given year, I can take a payout.
Up to 1 week, which is 3,000 to 5,000 depending on the employee.
But the one that payout that you're talking about, those 50,000 to one person?
No, that was across a union of 20 people.
Okay, thank you.
And so,
I thought
Andrew,
it was for one person. Sorry.
It was on average roughly 3,000 to 5,000 per employee in that union.
until Jason pointed this out, as far as the 4 contractual or contracted employees, even though they were at least 2 of them, and maybe just one of them, but at least one of them was in the habit of doing this on a regular basis and it never went in their budget. So they must have found the money someplace else by the end of the year, moved something around, but it was never budgeted. So one of the things Jason has accomplished by doing this is that we're now at least seeing the budget reflect the fact that normally this person takes a week of bought out vacation. So it's in there for at least fiscal year 22. Go ahead,
Kathy,
Jason.
I know obviously the union contracts and all the contract employees are outside of our purview, but what if we put together a advisory opinion kind of letter that says, you know, as new contracts come up, things like this, or things like, you know, cost of living adjustments or annual increases that should be tied more towards, you know, forecasted GDP growth or something, you know, kind of things that we think about. We provide an opinion, and obviously SAP and the selectmen can ignore it, but I think
that's really dangerous, Andrew, because collective bargaining occurs in executive session. You don't want to tip your hand.
no, I'm saying along the lines of, you know, if employees can you know, purchase vacation, it should be consistent, or or not, or personal days can roll over, or we think, you know, 5 days instead of 7 days, opinions. But it seems a lot of that, at your point, it's an executive session behind closed doors, and we just get handed this budget after the fact and we have to live with it.
Yeah, but I don't see how you practically do what you just said, given we have no executive session ability. And you certainly don't want to advertise exactly, you know, what their cards are. I can tell you that a few years ago, Sam and I went to the schools, the superintendent, to talk to him about possibly, because he actually represented the unions. This is Dr. Bram. This was a long time ago, so I'll talk about it. And we definitely proposed some things we wish they would start thinking about. And he listened to us. They didn't do them.
Yeah. I'm just thinking more, you can read the contract today, and if you could redline it, say things that are inconsistent between them or between that and SAP, and point out some things that concerns that we would have with the existing contract, and they could take it and whatever they want.
I don't think advisory can do this. I think if you, as a member of the public, want to talk to Mark Purple or whoever about suggestions that he may want to consider, you could do that. But I just don't think advisory's got a role in this.
I do think the other thing is just awareness, right? Is, you know, make sure that the Board of Selectmen watch at least this clip, or I know Marty has been hesitant to add this to the agenda. He asked Mark to address kind of some of the stuff in memo format, but you know, I think just awareness and let them form their own opinions as they head into the kind of the bargaining, you know, table. I think awareness is half the issue here, if you ask me, in terms of what I've found.
Yep. So I think you've accomplished that. So keep going, Jason. I know.
All right. So I'm going to shift to, you know, we've talked a lot about sick leave payout. Sorry, how much sick leave should you be allowed to accrue, and should that be paid out? And how much vacation should you be allowed to accrue and pay out? I think Personnel Board understands that and is moving forward with it. But that led me to actually look at what balances people had on the books. And a simple tie-out proved that people were carrying a lot more balance than they actually were owed. It was fairly simple math. There was two particular issues. One was there was a spreadsheet that originated from the fire department that went to the payroll and treasurer department that overstated vacation hours, probably 6 figures worth of, you know, if we actually had paid out. Now, the good news is we never paid anything out. But what it did was show that the process was being done by a union employee and not by our payroll and benefits coordinator in the treasurer's department.
And it was a union employee's work that would have been used if everybody on there had retired?
Yes. However, Chief Achilles had flagged this issue when he started. It just had never been implemented up at the townhouse. So this exercise has greatly expedited that process, and it's due to be completed this week in terms of payroll and benefits, maintains payroll and benefits for the entire town. Those numbers did flow to the town's auditor and are in the audited financial statements.
The bad ones or the good ones?
The bad ones. So They are aware of it though, and they were aware of it before issuing whatever they issued. The good news is the liability didn't jump, like it showed on a piece of paper. Part B of this was that there were SAP employees that were granted carryover extensions because of COVID. And I'll call it non-public safety departments for the most part, that there were no ability to be granted because it took them over what they were allowed to accrue per the SAP. My understanding is that impacted 6 employees. That has been rectified and restored. So good news is it was probably caught before any cash went out the door. We've obviously had a few recent employee departures. They were not subject to any of, I'll call it the math, but I'm very sure that Mark and Brian in particular are very focused on this process moving forward. And I'm confident it's headed in the right direction. I just did not expect that I'd actually have to give a report back to advisory.
Because you didn't think anything was wrong.
I asked 2 questions, right, which are usually simple data requests.
Right.
But then
so you didn't know you were opening up the can of worms that ended up being opened up when you asked your 2 questions.
I knew there was probably a can that needed to be opened, but I didn't think this onion would be peeled back 10 layers, right? I mean, we've been talking about this for 4 months.
So you originally asked your question because you knew about the chief not taking his buyout and basically, but not taking the vacation either. So you knew that one.
Well, I was just surprised that people get buyout for vacation time.
All right. So that's what really was your impetus though to start this, right? Was that?
Mm-hmm. And then watching other towns, they were having contentious arguments with bargaining units about accrued vacation because of
COVID
orders, et cetera. And I was surprised that there hadn't been any executive sessions to talk about it. If there had been executive sessions, I probably would have left it alone because that's outside our purview. But there wasn't, so I asked a question.
All right. So to summarize, you cleaned up the accrual as far as what we owe 6/30/21.
It's clean up to today's date to 1/20 of 21, I'd say.
Then the responsibility for maintaining the information has been transferred to one person in the town, the payroll person, who should be the person that does it. And then SAP is looking at the overall policy of how much to allow people to carry over that are on the SAP.
Yes.
Okay.
Right, which is, Andrew, I would advocate, if you have strong opinions on that is absolutely something, go to personnel board meetings, send a note to the personnel board as an individual, because that I think is fair game.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about Jason's work? Because this is it. This is his final report unless something else comes up.
Nope, good job.
So the main thing here is that going forward, the payroll department is going to actually keep track of all this information. It's going to be reflected in the town's financials and budgeted for.
I mean, it always was in the town's financials, but yeah, there'll be budget around it, and there's probably a little more rigor in the review process. And I do think there are some ways that, especially on the SAP side, they can clean up how much someone can carry, which limits not only our liability, but it also makes it easier to administer, which I think goes to Brian's request for additional hours, right? If we're making it easier to do some of these functions, then maybe those hours are already in the system and can be redeployed elsewhere.
And
Okay,
Andrew,
thank you.
FYI, the auditors don't look at every single transaction, they test things. So he definitely should have tested that spreadsheet, and you would have thought maybe he would have seen problems too. So that's a little disconcerting. But go, Jason. All right, moving on. It's getting late.
I'm going to bring John back in the room unless anyone has any other questions.
Welcome back, John. We're almost done.
You're almost
Okay,
done.
that is all we've got tonight as far as substance stuff. We're not going to talk about the school research committee work. We're meeting tomorrow night and we will report back next week as far as where that's going. We've got the report from NASDAQ, as everybody knows. So you'll have more information on that next week. Let's see. So review of calendar for future meetings. So does everybody know that we are not meeting with the schools on Wednesday? We're meeting with them on Thursday, and that's been confirmed, Andrew D, in case you can see the email. So
Yes, I saw that email. Yeah, Thursday, the 28th.
Yep, so I deleted the Wednesday meeting and the Thursday meetings there. So we'll start right with schools. I told them we start at 6:45. So give us 15 minutes to get started.
Everyone on the advisory committee can make that meeting too.
All right, I'm assuming that sounds.
Take that as a yes.
Okay. Speak now. All right, I've also scheduled beyond that one, 2, 3, and 2:10. So you should have invites for both of those two. All right, and then we'll see where we go from there. But we do have a little bit more flexibility now as far as timing goes. Any other matters properly brought forth? But any of AC? All right, anything from our audience of 2? So seeing nothing from our audience of 2. Judy, would you like to make a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
Andrew D. Roll call, Judy.
Aye.
Cook, aye. Andrew D.
Aye.
Jason.
Aye.
Tim.
Aye.
Andrew P.
Aye.
John Rooney.
Aye.
Okay, 7-0. Thank you, everybody. I know these meetings are long, but thank you for hanging in there.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy.